for national anthem. I would like to ask the Dean of Engineering and Architecture at the AUB, Dr. Makram Swaydan, whose support to this scholarly event is limitless. He will address the audience with a PowerPoint presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasreen. Can you all hear me? There are plenty of seats on this side if anybody wants to come down. Okay. Your Excellency, Mr. Arthur Nazarian, Minister of Energy. Ms. Rula Majdalani, Director of Sustainable Development and Productivity Division at UNESCO. Trustee Munib Masri. Is Trustee Nabil Habaib here? He was supposed to attend. President of AUB, Dr. Fadl Khouri. President of Hariri University, Dr. Riyad Jdeed. Distinguished colleagues, and most importantly, our students. I would like to welcome you all to this workshop on energy finance in the Middle East, uncertainties and opportunities. This workshop is hosted by the Munib and Angela Masri Institute for Energy and Natural Resources. The Masri Institute has been a catalyst behind many activities at AUB, and I'd like to take a few moments of your valuable time and say something about the achievements of the Institute over the last few years. I'll focus on the contributions of the Institute to research and outreach at AUB. The Masri Institute was established in June of 2007 as a result of a generous endowment of $5 million by Trustee Munib Masri. The pledge was completed in 2013. It has promoted research in science and engineering and contributed to the sustainable and responsible use, management, and conservation of energy resources in the region. It's governed by a steering committee of faculty members from the Faculty of Engineering and Architecture and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And oversight is provided by an advisory council with Masri Institute representatives. The goals are to build a community of AUB experts addressing complex problems related to energy and natural resources. It has funded transformative research in energy to serve the needs of society. It has contributed to solutions and policies for green energies and for the efficient management of energy and natural resources. It has convened international symposia that bridge academia and practice. This slide, you'll have an exam on it at the end. It has 54 names on it, and those are faculty members that have received funding from the Masri Institute. They come from 4 different faculties: the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Science, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, Faculty of Engineering and Architecture, and the Aliyan School of Business, coming also from 11 different departments. So its coverage has been very widespread. We've had activities in seminars, hosting visiting fellows, research awards, international workshops, high-impact conferences, and professional training programs. We have provided consulting services to energy and government stakeholders. We have facilitated research and development projects on energy and supported educational outreach in the Pro-Green program, as I'll mention later. The first inaugural event of the Masri Institute was held on April 27, 2012, here at AUB. The title of the conference was "The Role of Natural Gas in Lebanon's Future Energy Mix." This conference was very timely, and it was attended by 300 participants, 5 Lebanese ministers, the general directors of the Ministries of Energy, Finance, and the Environment, the 6 members of the Lebanese Petroleum Authority board members, and over 50 professionals, including the ministers of energy from Turkey and from Cyprus. Other activities, 2012-13, we follow an academic year here. We had a 4th international workshop with a keynote address provided by Professor Jean-Marie Frichet. He's the Vice President for Research at KAUST, and more importantly, a nominee for the Nobel Award, Nobel Prize. He discussed energy research from fossil fuels to solar. In 2014, we had 4 activities, 13-14. We had at the FEA a workshop with the 6 members of the Lebanese Petroleum Authority, where it was standing room only. The 4th picture here on the right shows you the engineering lecture hall, which is very small, only 135 capacity. And it was standing room only, with a lot of heated discussion about what's the role of academia in terms of energy development and the oil and gas industry in Lebanon. We had a conference on big data, big computing, and the oil industry, opportunities for Lebanon and the Arab world. We had a panel discussion on ocean prediction and risk assessment as an environmental impact to oil and gas exploration. And we had the first symposium on material science and energy, co-organized with the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. In 14-15, we had the 5th international workshop on emerging energy scenarios in the Middle East, challenges and implications. This one, I gave it a special slide because ASHRI is an international organization for mechanical engineers that focuses on heating and air conditioning, and more recently, efficient building design. And we hosted the conference, the Masri Institute with AUB, hosted the conference in October of 2014. We had 200 attendees and 40 refereed technical presentations. As a result of the Masri Institute and its activities, Dr. Nassim Ghaddar, along with colleagues from the American University of Cairo and the Lebanese American University, submitted a proposal to the EU to start a pro-green program. The pro-green program emphasizes sustainable energy, water conservation, and green buildings. And this proposal was funded, and as a result of it, we started the first online diploma being offered by UB on green technologies. We had an agreement with the Ministry of Energy on February 7, 2014, where the agreement provides for the ministry to provide our faculty with data about the oil and gas industry, and for us to do meaningful research that will feed back to the industry in terms of their decision making and their progress in this area. We also launched the Pro-Green program. Moving forward, we will continue to provide and fund responsive research addressing energy shifts, promote external relations with leading regional and international institutions, and expand the consultative role of our faculty. In closing, I want to show you here the architect's drawing for the Masri building, which is supposed to host the Masri Institute. However, due to decisions above my pay grade, this building is not going to be built, and I'm showing you a picture of the Irani Oxy Engineering Complex, which hosts some of our research. Now I'd like to invite President Fadl Khouri to come to the podium. Dr. Khouri will be inaugurated on Monday as our 16th president at AUB, and he'll give you a few words.
Good morning, and thank you for coming. I'd like to start by thanking the minister, who very wisely and astutely took some time from his morning to attend a conference which I think is going to lead the way into the future. So, Your Excellency, Minister Nazarian, Trustee Masri family, Dean Swaidan, Director Nasreen Ghaddar, friends, students, colleagues, welcome to the opportunity to study novel ways to move our future forward in an energy conserving manner. The Masri Institute represents one of our university's most vital, functioning, and forward-looking centers, led by a member of the Lebanese Academy of Sciences, Dr. Nasreen Ghaddar, herself a brilliant researcher who, through a long-standing collaboration with another of our most outstanding researchers, Dr. Kamil Ghali, is breaking new ground in this and other areas. The Munib and Angela Masri Institute of Energy and Natural Resources is one of the university's most fundamental centers. If you look at things from any perspective, even if you're just bored and you read the price of oil today, you will recognize that we are in a whole brave new world, whether we like it or not. A world where energies are no longer as easily expendable, where we have a rapidly growing population that is more diverse, and where the gap between wealthy and underprivileged is growing wider. The Munib and Angela Masri Institute really looks at the fundamental intellectual bases in the physical environment for these issues, and provides for our faculty what I would call a stress-free environment to innovate and to really intellectually stimulate students who want to go into this area. As a direct result of Dr. Ghaddar's work that led to the Pro-Green diploma, Interim Associate Provost Hala Muhtaseb and I visited with Mr. Faris Saeed and got to visit the first truly green new center being built in Dubai. This is the way of the future. If you look at the Lebanon that I left 33 years ago, where yes, there were more green spaces than now, and you didn't have a giant skyscraper every few meters, you are looking at a world that is changing and not necessarily for the better. But the energy domain is one of the most fundamentally, intrinsically interdisciplinary areas. And it represents an area not only for social and environmental impact, but yes, for economic impact. And that's one of the reasons today we're particularly pleased to have our minister here. After all, Lebanon is in the business of rebuilding, we think, infrastructure, and hopefully eventually of making money, and not only from oil and gas. If you look at the success of technology and its translation, and I can speak as someone who is also the child of an institute, a cancer institute albeit, the fundamental tenet is that this concept must be built on increased confidence from investors, from donors, from others in the work of the scientists, and even more so, the fundamental confidence and excitements that students develop in the science and in the work. These institutes bring academicians, investors, donors, developers, public policy experts, and others together, but all are interested in one common thing, in making a difference. And this institute, we believe, can and will make a difference. It will make a difference in understanding investments in energy. It will make a difference in realizing those investments. I have to say that in my view, and I'm biased, universities are by far the best place to play that facilitating role. For all that has happened, universities remain among the most credible students and purveyors of the fundamental truth. If we work on major energy issues and we publish it or patent it in impactful areas, then people tend to look at that information. And that information then gets propagated and promulgated to elements of the society, be it the investment society or the society that needs energy resources that can make a difference. So today's workshop is one of many initiatives that you saw from Dean Sweden that this institute is directed. This really is, from the faculty perspective, our most multidisciplinary institute. It brings engineers and businessmen and women, and hopefully one day we'll bring some folks from the humanities, which we have emphasized, to write about our energy crisis and how it's impacting our society as a whole. I have to say, I am deeply grateful to the Masri family for their continued support. We all know that Munib has many interests, all of them humanitarian, but his continued focus and his family's on this great investment in the future, not only of Lebanon, but of the Arab world, is noted and deeply appreciated. I'd also like to thank the Masri Institute Steering Committee at AUB. Dr. Ghaddar has very refined tastes and exceptional faculty. She's invited Dr. Ali Ahmed, a Princeton scholar in energy policy, and Dr. Simone Naimi, and I want to thank all three of them for organizing this superb workshop, as I do the transformative handshake of ESQA, which is our partner in so many projects here and in helping to accommodate our unfortunate Syrian refugees. I want to close by saying that I think Makram threw down the gauntlet, so I guess we'll have a building next year. But I want to share my perspective, and this may be a counterproductive perspective for a president. From my perspective, institutes are more important than buildings. They energize innovation, they energize collaboration, they energize faculty and students to come together like no building can. Buildings are beautiful, but science transcends buildings. So thank you again, Mr. Masri and the Masri family, for this transformative institute. I'd like to invite, I think Dr. Ghaddar will introduce Munib Masri, or Mr. Masri. It will be my pleasure to have you come and tell us that you're more interested in the building, but I know you know that the institute is more important. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Good morning, Your Excellency, Mr. Nazarian, my friend Mr. Nazarian, Ms. Majdalani, President Fadl Khouri, who's close to my heart, President Shadid, Dean Sweden, distinguished speakers, guests, colleagues, the Deputy Ambassador of Palestine in Lebanon, Mr. Hassan Shantiye, my dear students, and last but not least, my children, Omar, May, and Zaha. Thank you for coming. I am honored to address you today at this workshop in financing energy projects in the Middle East organized by the Masri Institute. I would like to express my sincere and heartfelt welcome to AUB's new president, Dr. Fadl Khouri, who I cannot say how much I'm pleased and everybody is pleased to have him as a president. We are very proud of you, Fadlo. I would like to wish him the utmost success in leading our beloved university to a bigger and better future. I definitely look forward to supporting you in fulfilling AUB's noble mission as it serves the region and beyond. The theme of our workshop today is timely and one of vital importance to the area we live in. One of the key objectives of the Masri Institute is to offer a platform whereby academic research combined with professional expertise in energy and finance forms a powerful association. Such a combination is well positioned and well equipped to provide you with a clearer understanding of the challenges and opportunities that face energy's finance. As we meet today, the energy markets are facing major upheaval, with oil prices having dropped to a 12-year low. Ripple effects are being felt across global and regional economies, capital market, and corporates. This comes against a backdrop of slowing economic growth in China and other emerging markets, in addition to major geopolitical tension in our region, which mostly caused by the Israeli occupation to Palestine. Such developments and associated risks are having a major and immediate impact on investments in energy generation projects and energy infrastructure. On a brighter note, the workshop will examine investments in renewable and nuclear energy, which have been increasing annually. Our resources today will also provide their insight on current and emerging financing models for energy projects in the region. Meanwhile, investors and governments will need to identify the technology and human resources capacity, economic standing, policy frameworks, geopolitics, and social challenges that they will face as they evaluate renewable and nuclear power projects. There are also risks that need to be assessed given the fluctuations of oil and natural gas prices. Nuclear safety records, government support, stability, and the rate of decline in the cost of renewable technologies. All such factors will heavily influence decisions making for both governments and investors. As a way of background, the Masri Institute was established in 2007. The Masri Institute aspires to be a leader and a hub for research and development in the Middle East and Africa. It aims to create opportunities for top quality research at AUB as well as other regional universities. Just last year, we established a research fund for two universities in our area. One, the Jordan University, which is the first university was established in Jordan in 1962, and the other university in Jerusalem. It's called Al-Quds University. And I hope they will have the opportunity to link with this Masri Institute. The Masri Foundation has contributed $4 million for research and development for those two universities to provide research and development in all Jordanian universities and Palestinian universities. Finally, I would like to thank President Khouri, Dean Swaydan, the Masri Institute Steering Committee, the workshop facilitators, Nasreen Ghaddar, Director of the Masri Institute, Ali Ahmed, Research Scholar from Princeton University, and the distinguished speakers for their contributions, and of course, the students who will be deeply engaged in the discussions. As we maintain the vibrant conversation between the scholars, the scientific, the expert, and investment communities, I'm confident that the Masri Institute will provide an integral platform for learning and knowledge production for this and future generations, as well will provide support to decision makers across the field. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Misri. I would like to ask Ms. Rula Majdalani, the Director of Sustainable Development and Productivity Division at UN ESCWA, to say a few words in this session. And we thank you for your contribution today. We have a couple of speakers from ESCWA joining the workshop.
Thank you, Dr. Ghaddan. Your Excellencies, Mr. Arthur Nazarian, Trustee Munib al-Mosri, Dr. Fadlo Khouri, Dr. Swaidan, Dr. Nisreen. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today and to what I would see it as a long-term cooperation between the academia and international organizations. And I think there is a lot of scope for working together and for bringing this in a consolidated manner, what we call the science and policy interface, and would really bring strategic issues on the table for our region. I would like to thank you for choosing such an important topic, not because it's topical and timely, but as Dr. Khouri said in his inspiring words, it really cuts across so many fields. It cuts across, it talks to different disciplines, but it also talks to the politicians, to the researchers, to decision makers. And I think it is really, in a time where energy is in a transformational stage, I think it holds the seeds for breakthrough in the thinking about energy, as a challenge, but also as a solution. Now, as I understand this is in a bilingual workshop, I would like to present ESCWA statement in Arabic, if you don't mind. أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة الكرام. يسعدني ويشرفني المشاركة باسم الإسكوا وباسمي شخصياً في ورشة العمل هذه حول تمويل الطاقة في الشرق الأوسط، الصعوبات والفرص التي يتم تنظيمها من قبل صرحين عملاقين متميزين معروفين في المنطقة العربية بعطائهما وسعيهما الصادق والدؤوب لتحقيق التنمية المستدامة والتطور. وأعني بهذا الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت التي أفتخر أن أكون من خريجيها، ومؤسسة منيب وأنجلا المصري للطاقة والموارد الطبيعية. كما يسعدني الاستماع إلى أفكار المحاضرين الكرام وإلى مداخلات السيدات والسادة الخبراء. الحضور الكريم، تبرز الطاقة بشؤونها وشجونها وأكثر من أي وقت مضى ضرورية لمحاربة الفقر ولتأمين العيش الكريم وتحقيق مستويات متقدمة من الرفاهية. كما تبرز أهميتها في معالجة التحديات الاقتصادية والجيوسياسية وبالطبع البيئية والمناخية. وخير دليل على ذلك على أهمية الطاقة في التنمية التركيز العالمي الذي برز في مبادرة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة السيد بان كيمون حول الطاقة المستدامة للجميع بمحاورها الثلاثة: تأمين خدمات الطاقة الحديثة للجميع، مضاعفة المعدل العالمي لتحسين في كفاءة الطاقة، ومضاعفة حصة الطاقة المتجددة في مزيج الطاقة العالمي، وذلك بغضون العام بحلول العام 2030. وبرزت الطاقة المستدامة كمحور أساسي في أهداف التنمية المستدامة في القمة العالمية حول التنمية المستدامة، وما نتج عنها ما يعرف Sustainable Development Goals SDGs، وكذلك في مخرجات اجتماع الأطراف حول تغير المناخ الذي عقد في باريس في ديسمبر 2015 الكوب 21. وفي هذا الإطار انصبت المساعي الدولية لرصد وتحديد مصادر التمويل الضروري لذلك، ولا سيما زيادة فرص التمويل الخاص بالاستثمارات في مجالات الطاقة. وقد تضمن التقرير النهائي للمؤتمر العالمي الثالث لتمويل التنمية المنعقد في أديس أبابا في يوليو 2015 إمكانية تأمين وحشد 120 مليون دولار إضافي سنوياً بواسطة آليات تمويل خلاقة وفعالة بحلول عام 2020. ويرى الخبراء في مؤسسات التمويل الدولية أنه سيكون هناك حاجة في القطاعين العام والخاص ل3 أضعاف الاستثمارات الحالية للوصول إلى مستوى $1 تريليون لتحقيق أهداف المبادرة المذكورة أعلى. من المعروف أن بعض الدول العربية منتجة للنفط والغاز وستبقى كذلك لعدة عقود، إذ تتجاوز احتياطاتها من المادتين المجتمعتين 41% من الاحتياطي الإجمالي العالمي، في حين أن الإنتاج العربي الحالي هو بحدود 24% من الإنتاج العالمي. وهذه الدول ستكون بحاجة مستقبلاً إلى تأمين عائدات مالية كافية للقيام باستثمارات ضخمة لتطوير تجهيزات الاستخراج وتوسيعها وتحسين كفاءتها تحت مظلة الاقتصاد الأخضر. كما ستكون كافة الدول العربية بحاجة إلى استثمارات في مجال التكرير للحصول على مشتقات نفطية لتلبية الحاجات المحلية على الأقل. وفي هذا السياق تبرز المخاوف والشكوك بشأن توافر هذه الاستثمارات مستقبلاً في ظل انخفاض أسعار النفط بشكل مريع واستمرار ذلك منذ أكثر من 19 شهراً، إضافة إلى الأجواء الحالية السائدة في المنطقة من عدم الاستقرار السياسي والأمني. وكذلك الأمر في قطاع الكهرباء الذي عليه أن يؤمن كامل الحاجات للمجتمعات العربية من ناحية، وأن يواكب تزايد الاستهلاك من ناحية أخرى. ولا ننسى أن بعض الدول العربية لا تؤمن الكهرباء حالياً بالمستوى المطلوب، ففي السودان مثلاً لا يحصل غير سوى 31% من المواطنين على خدمات الكهرباء، وفي اليمن يصل هذا المعدل إلى 52. وفي العراق بلد النفط يتم استيراد أكثر من 7000 جيجاوات ساعة من دول مجاورة من خارج المجموعة العربية، ولا يتم تأمين الكهرباء على مدى 24 ساعة. أما في لبنان، تعلمون وضع لبنان فقد تحول العجز في القدرة الإنتاجية إلى مرض عضال المزمن، إذ لا يتجاوز تأمين الكهرباء خارج العاصمة الإدارية للمستهلكين بمعدل 12 ساعة يومياً. ولا ننسى الانقطاع التام للكهرباء الذي حصل في تونس في العام الماضي، في حين كانت الشركة التونسية للكهرباء والغاز تعتبر مؤسسة عربية ريادية في هذا القطاع. وقد أصبحت الموازنات الحكومية في معظم الدول العربية تعاني من المبالغ الضخمة اللازمة لقطاع الكهرباء، سواء لتلبية حاجات البنية التحتية أو لاستهلاكه من الوقود، في ظل كفاءة إنتاج غير كفؤة وفواقد فنية مرتفعة نسبياً في الشبكات. ومعظم هذه الموازنات لم تعد قادرة على الاستمرار في ذلك. ورغم النقص في القدرة الإنتاجية اللازمة لكافة المواطنين في أكثر من دولة عربية، فإن الطاقة الكهربائية الإجمالية المنتجة في العام 2014 تجاوزت 1,000,000 جيجاوات ساعة، ويتوقع أن ترتفع إلى أكثر من 1,500,000 جيجاوات ساعة في عام 2020، وإلى أكثر من 2,500,000 جيجاوات ساعة في العام 2030، أي بمعدل تزايد سنوي بحدود 5 إلى 6%. وذلك يعني أن الدول العربية ستكون في السنوات القادمة بحاجة إلى استثمارات تفوق 75 مليار دولار أمريكي سنوياً لتجهيز قطاع الكهرباء وتطويره، بما في ذلك تأهيل التجهيزات الموجودة واستبدال القديم منها وتجديده. مع الإشارة إلى التوجه إلى اعتماد مصادر الطاقة المتجددة لإنتاج الكهرباء، كما ينبغي لاعتبارات بيئية معروفة في إطار حسن إدارة واستثمار الموارد الطبيعية، يتطلب استثمارات أضخم من ذلك، كون الكلفة التأسيسية لإنتاج الكهرباء في هذه الحالة لا سيما من الطاقة الشمسية المتوفرة في الدول العربية هي مرتفعة نسبياً بالمقارنة مع التجهيزات التقليدية لإنتاج الكهرباء من الوقود الأحفوري. ولن يكون ممكناً تأمين ذلك من الموارد الحكومية العادية، بل من الضروري الاعتماد بصورة متزايدة على الشراكة بين القطاعين العام والخاص للقيام بهذه المشاريع. الحضور الكريم، لا تقتصر الحاجة إلى التمويل على مشاريع البنية التحتية فقط، لأن الإدارة الكفؤة لقطاع الطاقة تتطلب أيضاً في بلداننا العربية إعطاء الأهمية اللازمة لمشاريع كفاءة الطاقة، سواء على مستوى المواطن العادي كمستهلك نهائي أو على مستوى المصانع وحتى محطات توليد الكهرباء وشبكات الكهربائية. وإن الاستثمارات المطلوبة لا سيما على مستوى المستهلك تتسم بطابع لا مركزي وتتطلب آليات تمويلية خاصة وخلاقة. ومهما يكن من أمر، فمن الضروري التأكيد على استثمارات اللازمة في المجالات المتعددة لاستخراج النفط والغاز والإنتاج والتكرير وتوليد الكهرباء ونقلها وتوزيعها، وفي مجالات الطاقة المتجددة سواء للاستعمال المباشر كسخانات الشمسية أو لإنتاج الكهرباء في مجالات كفاءة الطاقة ضرورية، ويجب العمل على تأمينها من كافة المصادر الممكنة. ولا يمكن الحصول على المشاركة الفعلية من القطاع الخاص إلا بتأمين المناخ الملائم للاستثمار، بدءاً بالاستقرار الأمني والسياسي والتشريعي والحكومي، مروراً بالحكم الرشيد الذي لا بد منه لتأمين فرص النجاح وبكافة أوجهه ومعانيه، فمن الشفافية إلى تبسيط الإجراءات وضمان الاستثمارات وحل النزاعات ونشر المعرفة وتقديم الإحصاءات الدقيقة والصادقة. الحضور الكريم، هناك نقاط ضعف وهناك نقاط قوة في دولنا العربية، هناك مخاوف وشكوك، وهناك أيضاً الكثير من الفرص والإمكانات للنجاح. فلنعمل سوياً كشركاء المنظمات الدولية والإقليمية ومؤسسات القطاع الخاص والمجتمع المدني والحكومات لتحقيق أهدافنا في مجالات الطاقة المستدامة في إطار حسن إدارة الموارد الطبيعية. وهنا أود التركيز على أهمية التقاطع بين الطاقة والمياه والأمن الغذائي في منظور إدارة الطاقة. وأؤكد هنا استعداد الأسكوا بأن تكون عنصراً فاعلاً ضمن هذه الشراكة لتحقيق الطاقة المستدامة للجميع. الحضور الكريم، أتمنى النجاح لاجتماعنا الهام هذا والتواصل معكم، وأثني على دور الجهات المنظمة التي دعت إليها، وشكرا.
Thank you, Mr. Masdalani. I would like to ask now, you can speak while seated here, you don't have to, it's as you like. His Excellency, Minister Artur Nazarian has graciously agreed to inaugurate this workshop. So the floor is yours.
Dr. Fadlo Khouri, President of AUB, Trustee Munib Masri, guest speakers and attendees, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning. It is always a pleasure to be here with you today to celebrate another landmark event organized by AUB. It is no doubt that AUB is a role model in the education and research sectors, not only in Lebanon, but also in the whole Arab world. Our gathering here has a different flavor today, since it coincides with the nomination of Dr. Fadl Khouri as the 16th president of AUB on its 150th anniversary. Allow me to wish Dr. Khouri the best of luck and success in his new assignment. I'm certain that under his leadership and with the support of all the distinguished and prestigious AUB faculty and staff, AUB will flourish for another 150 years. In that regard, I would like to stress the fact that the Minister of Energy and Water is ready to cooperate with AUB in areas of mutual interest. Our gathering is just a small example of the cooperation between AUB and the Ministry. The title of this workshop indicates our meeting targets a very challenging topic, that of financing energy projects in the Middle East. In fact, energy finance in our area faces uncertainties and challenges, but offers opportunities for development. I personally believe that this important event will present a strong professional platform where researchers, academics, and decision makers meet and brainstorm together to develop and improve the opportunities of building energy projects. Such meetings would definitely reduce the risk and uncertainties facing these projects at the national scale. The Ministry is looking forward to receiving the recommendations of this public workshop. Allow me to thank the Munib and Angela Masri Institute of Energy and Natural Resources for organizing this event and for giving the opportunity for expert speakers to meet here at AUB and discuss solutions that would eventually lead to the development of our countries. We would focus on the fact that our countries need most is an alignment of efforts between business professionals, decision makers, and the next generation that will change our future, a future that we want bright, sustainable, and prosperous. Whereas the event today focuses on both renewable and nuclear energy projects, I would like to note that Lebanon is moving with strong steps in the renewable energy area. It should be also noted that nuclear energy is not currently on the national agenda of the country. The Ministry of Energy and Water has invested a lot of efforts in order to develop the sustainable energy sector in Lebanon. During the past 3 years, renewable energy has witnessed a remarkable growth and positive dynamics, leading to the installation of energy of around 21 megawatts of renewable energy projects. The establishment, the estimates of the Lebanese Center of Energy Conservation, LCEC, for 2016 are around 50 megawatts of new renewable energy installations. The Central Bank of Lebanon is also doing a great job in that regard, with investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy projects during the last 3 years, exceeding $380 million US. According to the governor of the central bank, more than 10,000 jobs are already created in the country. As this market is growing rapidly, our future decisions and actions should be based on more solid technical ground. Your meeting here is one main milestone towards setting clear scientific approaches upon which national policies should be developed. I would like to thank you all for your presence here and for your active participation in this workshop. Special thanks to Dr. Nisreen Ghaddar for her continuous efforts. We would look forward for a fruitful conference that would eventually lead to a prosperous and sustainable future for our country. God bless you all. Thank you.
We thank our dignitaries, and we have a 15-minute recession before the start of the first panel so that the distinguished party can leave. Thank you.
Hello, Shafak from Turkey.
You are?
I am Shafa Karda.
Welcome everybody to the first panel in this workshop on regional outlook and country perspective. I'd like to bring to your attention that we're going to have 3 presentations first, and then they will be followed by question and answer, so that we get the views of our 3 speakers. Our first presentation is going to be by Dr. Rakan Ayoub. He's the financial analysis and modeling for mega projects. Primary focus is actually on economic forecasting and analytical modeling in energy sector. Dr. Rakan is currently the responsible financial analyst for the Jordan Nuclear Power Plant Program. Previously, an executive director at Ascendiad Advisory LLP. Clients served included renewable energy sector, solar energy, wind energy, and wind farms. He's done investments and services that are acquired in setting up a private equity fund outside the GCC region. Regions of preference were North and South America, Europe, and Far East. So we are looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Good morning. I'm going to be giving you a brief update on Jordan's nuclear power project specifically. As I'm sure last year Dr. Kamal was here and he gave you a little bit of an update. For those who were not here last year, we're going to start from an overview, and bear with me if some of these slides are familiar to you.
Is everybody hearing well? No, they're not. So
Okay.
This is our backup thing.
Okay. Let's
is there a pattern?
نخلي هذا خلص. Okay. This is good enough. Jordan, of course, this is Lebanon, so most of you guys are very familiar with Jordan. Okay. Jordan, about 190,000 square kilometers. Small only port is Aqaba. Coastline is 26 kilometers. GDP is middle, and GDP per capita is about 5,000. As 2013, updated about 5,500. And annual growth is about 4.5%. Now this year there's been dropped a little bit as far as the World Bank to a little bit less due to regional events. Just a slight overview of the Jordan economics. This is the electrical demand forecast for Jordan for until 2035. Now this graph this is an older graph, so as far as this was prepared about 2010 or so, our 2015 we are on track. This was a good forecasting, just to make sure test the guys at NEPCO, they're good. Our electricity supply options, here they are for you. In 2006, 7, 8, we were doing great because of our Egypt gas supply. Most of it was coming from Egypt, but 95%. And then some problems started happening, and we dropped in supply coupled with the increase in prices of oil. Led to tremors in our budget, and we were stuck with finding alternative solutions quickly. We had in 2007 a plan in place already to actually start diversifying, but this was put in a fast track because of what happened. Now these are our options, basically imported natural gas, heavy fuel, light fuel, local natural gas, LNG, oil shale, renewables, and nuclear option. Each of them have its own pluses and minuses. Imported natural gas, we had it, we tried it, and it's a risk. Heavy fuel is expensive, and it goes straight with the terms of supply and price fluctuations. Local natural gas, we have a Risha, which is small gas field, and it's not enough for maybe 5% of Jordan's need. LNG now, we already finished LNG's terminal, which is basically just for a while, but still, as an LNG terminal, you have the supply risk,
and also the price risk. Unfortunately to us, now oil is pretty cheap, and the LNG prices are coupled with oil, so we're blessed for the time being. Oil shale, we're working on it right now. Renewables, as we all know, are limited utilization and non-dispatchable. And then there's the nuclear option. 2008, Jordan took a decision that nuclear option can be and one of the options, and they went ahead and started full force in taking this option into consideration and doing all the necessary studies to actually find out that are needed for the decision to take effect as far as building a nuclear power plant. These are the implementing steps in putting and building a nuclear power plant in Jordan. We have a regulator, procurement agency, and infrastructure requirements, technology, and the investor operator. And all these right now, from 2008 up to now, have been identified. Regulator have been built, have been structured. Laws have been passed and set together. Take into consideration, of course, that our limited knowledge has been coupled and backed by world-class expertise. The VVR technology has been selected after extensive bidding, and between three, we had the Canadian, the French, and the Russians. And the Rosatom was brought forth a proposal to be also an investor and operator, which was accepted as viable. Now, as far as JAC is concerned, as far as what we do as Jordan Atomic Energy Commission is basically we're mandated to implement nuclear energy strategy in Jordan, which is basically as per mandate 2008, to find a designer vendor and to build a generation 3 and 3 plus nuclear power plant between 700 and 1200, which is basically what the grid can handle. Over 1200 is too big for a grid. Below 700 is basically a smaller reactor, and for several reasons that are mainly technical, out of my sphere of business, I'm not going to be involved in those, it was not selected. Cabinet decision 2013 to basically to pick Rosatom as the Russian technology as the contractor, and Rosatom overseas as investor operator to implement it in two-stage solution and basically keep the all financing options for the project on the table, and designate JAC to negotiate with the Russian side. Two things here have to be taken into consideration for us. The first one is a two-phase approach, which basically mitigates most of our risks. We don't want to go into one-phase approach, basically select and start working, because with the two-phase approach, your first phase defines all the parameters for the project, including your investors, including all your lenders, and basically mitigates your risks. And then you take on board all your debts, you take on board basically your active investors and your commitments. So you have everything defined before you go on board, you go in on the project. Because you are a beginner, you're aware this is the first of a kind for us in Jordan. So we have to do this to basically mitigate some of our risks. The second is keeping all the financing options for the project on the table, because we didn't want to limit ourselves to one financing option or the other. This is this is the structure of the company. JAC transfers eventually to a Jordan Nuclear Power Company, the company which has been already established, and then with the investment decision, which should be taken after all the parameters and all the end of the phase one. You will have the investor coming in, the company, and becomes a full-fledged operator to run and to implement the project. This is our NPP. Jordan is not on a river. Jordan, the sea, the site that's been selected is far away from the sea. So we went all with the Palo Verde model, which is basically dry cooling, which basically uses treated water for cooling. This, I believe, this is for us the only option, and this has been tested and tried in the United States, in Arizona. Basically, water comes in from treated, tertiary treatment is stored, cooled, and then evaporates. The sites that have been chosen are Aqaba, Wadi Rum, Wadi Araba, Al Samra, and Bani Hamad. This is the countrywide survey that was performed for Jordan to select a site. And this was the Samra, which was first selected as a site, which is about 5 to 7 kilometers from the treatment plant. But after the Fukushima, there was updated the countrywide survey due to the Fukushima requirements. We implemented those, and the secondary site was chosen, which was which is site area A, as you can see here. It's about 60 kilometers away, less population, et cetera, and these are the site area. As you can see, it's the topography is different. It's more suitable. It's less seismic, so it meets more the requirement post Fukushima. Now, this is basically an overview of what the GNPP is. 2 pressurized water reactors, generation 3, 2 1,000 megawatt electric power reactors. Commercial operation is 24-25. Lifetime is 60 years, and development, construction, operations, spent fuel management, and decommissioning are all being developed and put together right now and defined in phase 1. This is our reference plant. It's built already in Kudankulam. There's 2 and 3 are being built, and 3 and 4 are being built. 5 and 6 are to follow.
Dr. Rakan, if you bring the microphone closer.
Sure,
yes,
absolutely,
so
absolutely.
That,
Sure.
people can hear you.
Let me give you an overview of our two-phase approach, which is basically a little better for beginners, for beginning countries, for countries introducing nuclear power, defines the risks. The first phase is basically a development stage. Development phase for basically development phase, which basically in this phase we conduct and the required site characterization EIA for the site for the project. We prepare a bankable feasibility study. Now, we've already conducted the feasibility study for the project, which is required, and upon that feasibility study, we have of course, in partner with a world-class consultant and expert, and the results were positive. The project was feasible. Now, with this, we take all the outputs of all the site characterization and the EIA, and we prepare a bankable feasibility study. Now, this will be in discussion with our investors, in discussion with our lenders, and we prepare something that will be finalized for the project. We secure all the financing of the project, and we finance all the agreements related for the project. When this is all done, we go ahead with phase 2, which is basically technical design development, power plant construction, and the commissioning of the project. We don't start with the technical design, which is costly. We don't start with anything else unless we secure phase 1. This is the project status. We signed the PDA already. We signed the IGA already, which is the project development agreement and the intergovernmental agreement. Project RFP has been issued, and we're right now working on those. Studies are currently being conducted for the site characterization, and the financial working group for the project has been established. The PDA, this is the details of the PDA, which is basically a project level agreement defining the relationship between what's required of the Jordanian side, what's required of the Russian side, how the project is going to be moving forward till we get the investment decision, until we get to finish the phase 1, and included in those everything and every single agreement required to successfully get to the construction and phase 2. This was signed already on September 22nd, 2014, gentlemen, ladies. And the IGA basically is a higher level agreement between both the governments of Jordan and the governments of Russia. And this was signed in March 2024, 2015. This is the work streams right now. Basically, we have partners, and then we establish the GNPC. On technology side, we have a technology vendor. We have already selected the vendor. We get to the licensing part in partnership, of course, and working with our EMRC, which is the Energy Minerals Regulatory Commission. Infrastructure, we finished the site characterization and the infrastructure development. Project, we signed the PDA, which has been signed, and then we negotiate the EPC and we sign it. And on the financing side, we finish the feasibility study, which is bankable feasibility study, and we engage with the financial community and eventually take on our lenders and investors and start the project. These are the tasks right now that are being performed, and the dates up to 2017, which is basically the anticipated date into 2017 when we start with finish phase 1 and go into phase 2, which is basically the construction of the project. These are the details. This is the detail of the cooling system optimization. Now, one of the problems, or one of the problems, with Jordan is not exactly, Jordan doesn't have a lot of water, and we have to be very frugal with the water and know exactly how to get it and where to get it. Now, unfortunate to us, technology is never a hinder. Technology is there, and we are now at the time and age when we actually can use technology to our advantage. We have a model that has been implemented. Now we just have to basically take that model and put it to our use, and we will use this cooling system optimization is basically to take that model and put it to our use for our specifics. With the end of this cooling system, we'll be able to take to use a model of taking the water from the Al Samra sewage treatment plant to cool the nuclear power plant in Jordan. Advisory services is basically the scope of the work that's required by an advisor to basically assist us with the feasibility, bankable feasibility, risk analysis, risk assessment, debt solicitation, and negotiation of the contracts. And the electricity market research is basically a very important document that will ensure that any investor or that provider, lender, that this project, when whatever energy is produced, has a place for it to be sold. Although we are providing a take or pay agreement, take or pay guarantee, they still want to make sure that there is a place for this electricity to be sold, and the Jordan structure of the market structure, and if need be being sold to our neighbors. Jordan, as it has been presented to you this morning, our neighbors might require and do require energy, and this might be an option for us also to sell and to export some of the excess electricity being produced. Grid study, of course, is a very important document, as has also been presented to you this morning. Whenever you bring in some foreign component and you are producing electricity in a certain fashion, and then you come in with the renewables, or you come in with a big load like like nuclear, you have to adjust your grid, and a grid study has to be conducted to see what kind of costs, what kind of updates are required, and these will eventually have to be, somebody has to pay for them, or you might be fine and you can just keep things as is because your grid is fine. But you have to know how you are, and this requires a study for both the lenders, for both the investors, for the company, for the electricity company. This is the milestones for the whole project. Basically, in a nutshell, we start with the project development agreement signed. Today is, or this, you have a little red marker, and we're looking for 2025 for Unit 2. And basically, our milestones are well defined. We know where we are. We know where we want to go. We know every single milestone, if there is a shift, it's slightly here and there, but overall, we know where our project is, and we're putting them to whereby we get to this commissioning date. And there as far as risks and as far as the financial risk is concerned, you do your homework once or twice or 3 times. As I was saying to Nadira, Dr. Nadira, you can be late a little bit now in preparatory stage, but it is a catastrophe in any project. When you are late or when you do your homework in the wrong time, when you actually take on the debt or you engage with investors and you take on something and then you realize, oh yeah, I didn't do my homework. I'm sorry, let me just delay. We're doing everything once and twice and 3 times right now, so that once we take on our investors and engage with them and we start our project, we are doing things by the minute and by the hour, and we know exactly what's going on, and we're in control. This is the results of our preliminary feasibility study, and 10 cents was actually acceptable. Taking into consideration these are market assumptions. Now the next assumption we're going to be using are going to be assumptions coming in from banks and with engagement, and these are they are actually acceptable up to now and from our discussions with lenders. This is where the hard work begins. To deliver a financial project, you have to mitigate risks. You don't mitigate risks, nobody's going to talk to you. We have the risks that are identified, the main risks, high-level risks, and these, of course, they're going to be detailed. We have schedule risk, construction risk, political risk, fuel risk, market risk, operating risk, and nuclear risk. For each of these, we have gone to make sure we try to identify how we can mitigate it, and for each of these, we have done the following. For schedule risk, two project phase approach to start with was the best means so we don't jumble our cards. Because we are a beginner, we don't have the experience of building 5 nuclear reactors, nuclear power plants. Phase 1 defines all the project developments, project parameters, so that when we get to phase 2, we know exactly everything, how it goes, and we don't get unwarranted delays. For construction risk, you get an EPC contractor who has excellent experience, who's a world-class contractor, who's done many projects, and by that you ensure at least that this contractor knows the project and knows well. Political risk, you have an investor called the government of Jordan. When you have a government as a partner, political risk becomes mitigated. Not mitigated, but they're a partner with you. If you can't beat them, join them. Fuel risk, secure fuel supply agreement with a viable partner and with somebody who will give you a long-term contract. Market risk, mitigated with the long-term power purchase agreement. Operating risk, a strong international operator, and nuclear risk treaties, as we have done so from decommissioning, spent fuel on all sides and all sectors. We cover it with our international treaties, so we have everything covered. This is the way our negotiation discussions are structured. Government, the main parties right now, the main project sponsors are the government of Jordan and Rouse. The general contractor is Atoms for Export, fashion. The electricity off-taker is the NEPCO, National Electricity Project Company. Fuel supplier is Tival. Water supplier is the Ministry of Jordan. Operator is the Rosatom, subsidiary of Rosatom. And debt financing is supplier, banks, and lenders, and now we're negotiations with discussions with them. And the project structure right now is government of Jordan 51%, Rosatom 49%. And this is the project structure as a whole. There are discussions with more investors, be it on the investment side and be it on subcontractor side. And these are ongoing right now. And basically, on the fundraising of the project, the joint fundraising approach is basically a finance working group established, preliminary financing plan prepared, funding requirements, sources of fund established, initial discussion with potential investors, initial discussions with potential suppliers, financial and technical, selection of supplier based on technical and cost feasibility, and preparation of distribution of materials to potential suppliers. And basically, in a nutshell, that's what we have been on till now. Some of it is boring,
thank
but
you,
that's
Dr.
it.
Khan.
That's our job. Thank you.
So questions will be left at the end so that we proceed with our second speaker today. Mr. Safak Herdim, if you prefer to present while seated, and then I can ask one of the students to just click the presentation because the sound is better on this than at the podium, but we can try. Sure, okay, yeah, it is.
You want me to use the mic?
Yeah, you can use the mic over there.
You can all hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm a big man, I can speak loudly.
Yeah, all right. So I just want to introduce you. Mr. Safak Herdim worked in many projects involving multinational financial institutions during the past 10 years. His most interesting career started with Eldorado Gold Corporation in Turkey. During the past 5 years, Mr. Herdim has been the managing partner of Herdim Attorney at Law and worked to attract new investors, identify new economic models, turning the new inflow of information into new projects, analyzing sectors in detail, and finally helping to establish wide communication network. His latest accomplishment was to establish a legal committee of Global Offset and Counter Trade Association at Washington, D.C., based NGO. He has more than 500 articles and special focus on transatlantic trade and investment partnership, and has cooperation with some UK-based university. He's also the EMEA director of Deutsche Fund Placement Company, arbitrator and general partner of American International Commercial Arbitration Court, a special projects officer of Power Law Committee at International Bar Association. Today, as a result of the great relationships of both public and private sector entities in Turkey, Mr. Hardim acts as a consultant to ministries and an ambassador of goodwill, bridging foreign investment with local Turkish industry and helping forge new and important commercial alliances. So Mr. Hardim has recently been awarded at London Stock Exchange as a result of professional skills in financial markets. So the floor is yours, and I'm going to put your presentation.
Okay, thank you very
on the
much.
computer.
Thank you. I would like to thank you for all and the kind hospitality of American University of Beirut, and thank you for joining us at this event today. I will give a brief outlook about the energy market in Turkey, and then I will continue about the challenges and the opportunities in that regard. As you know, Turkey is the 18th or 17th major economy all around the world, and we have 1.5 billion USD purchasing power parities on the basis of United States dollars, and 800 billion GDP as per latest ratios. And we have the inflation rate of around 7%. What's going on in the market is, as you all know, we are in a region which have started with the zero problem with the neighborhoods, but now having several problems in the region, and we are very dependent on the energy. Energy is a niche area which was focused by the government and by international financial institutions and the banks all over the world in Turkey. And after all these ratios, we need to also manage how can we close that account deficit, which is around $45 billion. We have now around 65 or 70 gigawatt installed capacity in Turkey, and the 50% of that was managed in the government by the government companies in the past, but it's now mostly privatized. So the privatization rate is around 70s, and the generation is mostly made by the private companies in Turkey. The petroleum market, by the end of 2014, the production was over 17 million barrels, and the consumption was 157 million barrels. So it says that more than 60% of the total oil demand was imported as a crude oil. And in terms of the gas storage, we're now investing in gas storage facilities, and as of 2013, the storage capacity was 5 BCM. And under the Turkish law, the gas importers are required to store at least 10% of the gas that they have imported. And the natural gas, the 99% of the natural gas imported, and the 55% of it comes from Russia. And the 18% comes from Iran, and this 12% of it comes from the Azerbaijan, and the consumption is around 50 BCM. What's going on the electricity market? The electricity generation is mostly based on the natural gas powered plants, which is around 48%. And then it's followed by the coal, which is 29%. The hydro is 16%, and the wind is 3%. And the state-owned generation company, EUAŞ, is making the generation ratio, it's around 30% of the all installed capacity. And the targets, you know, we have 223 targets in the government, and what we want to do, we want to raise the installed capacity around, we would like to double it, and it's around 1.20 gigawatts, what we want to do as a government. And we get the renewable shares, the 30% of the all installed capacity in the market, and maximize the hydropower and the wind power. And also we have to get the transmission lines to 16,000 kilometers. And on the basis of the gigawatt ratios, Turkey is targeting to reach in the biopower 1 gigawatt, and the geothermal 1 gigawatt, and the hydro 34 gigawatt, and the solar 5 gigawatt, and the wind 20 gigawatts as per 2023. The estimated capital to realize all these projects is around $110 billion, which is approximately half of the amount which has been invested by the developed and the developing countries till now. And I don't know how Turkey will achieve about this process. And as I'm a lawyer, I have been involved in the projects and the transaction from the government side, from the banking side, and also the investor sides. And what I observed is that I can frankly say that Turkey has no strategy in generating the business in the energy market. We mostly focus on the tactics. And if there is a problem, especially in terms of the political tensions, then we go for the other side and start to invest and negotiate the parties to make the generation as we are. As a result of that, we are dependent in the market. So which we call the system integration is the lackness in the market. And from the financial side, there are also some lacknesses. I observed that the Turkish banks are not aware of what's going on all around the world in terms of project financing. I have been representing many private and state banks in some major projects, and I observed that the banks are giving the lending the money as if they are providing the banking service other than project finance. And they require the absolute assignment of all receivables without any risk. And at the end of the day, they lock you, and they keep that you cannot manage the money, you cannot manage the project. So what I suggest to the investors in that regard is use the ring fencing method, and as possible as you can apply, diversify the all assets and the projects to be subject to the project finance issues. And the other issue is about the securities. The securities over the immovables and movables are really incredible. And it's, again, a misunderstanding approach in the project finance matters. If you lend, let's say, 10,000 USD from a bank, they expect you to give at least $1 million guarantee for that. So it's impossible to manage and achieve that project, but there is no alternative solutions. From the foreign resources perspective, one of the issues that I'm now working on is, especially for the EBRD, is regarding the climate change risk, which is imported in payback amounts, which is a boilerplate in project finance issues. We have never witnessed many years in Turkey, especially in Istanbul, that there are thunderstorms and bad weather conditions. Now we are now working on a new insurance policy, which covers the risks, not the damages, which are resulted due to the change and the climate change. I can give you an example. We expect that 10 unit sunshine here in the solar projects, and howsoever, I don't know, the climate has been changed and it's now 6. There is no direct damage, there is no damage, but there is a risk. There is a risk in a loss of profit. And this is somehow we can say the climate change, and you cannot involve and you cannot manage it. So the revenue coming from these projects should be covered by the insurance companies, as the bank says. But there is no insurance in there, there is no coverage in there, and I will discuss this issue in this year in Washington, D.C. during the IBA conference. And this is, I think this will affect all the parties involved in the project finance issues. And also there is no EPC accreditation. there is no data information, that you cannot find any data which is reliable in the EPC management, and there's no blacklist or the whitelist of the EPC companies in Turkey. So whomever you find, and if you are familiar and if you believe that they are doing good business, you follow with them, and that's the whole story. The other issue is about the losses in the transmission and the distribution. We plan to change our grid system, and we will convert it to the smart grids. I don't know who are the candidates, but as I heard from some high-level government officials, the American companies showed their intention to do that in the near future. And especially in the solar markets, now we are also trying to build up a new mechanism to raise the funds, which we call the energy investment trusts, which is working like the cooperatives. And the director of the renewable energy is now working on the roof solar system, and they've tried to find out the funding methodology like the Solar City does in the United States. And they try to create a pool which was created by all investors, individuals, and the consumers, and to make their energy without the support of the government. One of the issues that I would like to stress on is about the industrial partnerships and the industrial cooperation among the countries. As you know, as a Turkey, we have been spending a lot for many years for defense-related matters, and we do the same in the energy as well. And I don't know if you are aware of what's going on in that market. It's simply called offsets. And Turkey is now planning to reach and publish the new offset policies and in energy procurement, because we pay a lot to the energy and we don't get anything in terms of the counter-trade process. And we expect the investors, or in the next 10 years, we expect the sellers of the energy to invest, to develop, and to grow up the local industry, and to get the value to the Turkish market in terms of, if it is today NPP, we will ask Rosatom if the tensions are going down, to learn, to teach us about how to make the business in nuclear power side. I can get the questions, because I almost finished my presentation.
Yeah. We'll have the questions
On the
after
back side,
this.
okay.
But thank you very much
Thank
for
you for
the
listening.
presentation. And we move to the third panelist and speaker, Dr. Dimitri Kononikov. Did I pronounce it right?
Yes.
All right. Dr. Dimitri is a research associate at the Center of Energy and Security Studies in the Russian Federation. He graduated from the School of Global Studies at Lomonosov Moscow State University and joined Center for Energy and Security Studies shortly after that. He was a coordinator and assistant to the chair of the Moscow Non-Proliferation Conference, Nuclear Energy Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, which took place in Russia capital in 2010, 12, and 14. His research interests include nuclear, non-proliferation, and nuclear security, with a focus on Russia-US cooperation in this field, information security, protection of critical infrastructure, and development of atomic energy use in the Middle East. And he's author and contributor to many publications. I'll leave the floor to you for the presentation. I'll put it on the screen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in Beirut for the second time. Last time I was there last year. It was too hot. Right now, I was told by my friend who lives here in Beirut that it will be very cold. So I put all my warmest stuff with me. And because she said that there are the same storms in the Lebanon which are currently in Russia, so I thought there will be a snow or something. So I arrived fully equipped for -12. Yes, but I found that actually I can go out in my suit and even without headdress. So, yes, yes. It's a pleasure being here again. I'd like to thank American Institute of Beirut and Institute for their hospitality and having me there. Following my fellow panelists' presentation, I would like to stress that right this week in Moscow, our Center for Energy and Security Studies published and made a presentation of our huge report, Prospects for Nuclear Power in the Middle East with Russia Interests. It has country profiles for every country newcomer in the Middle East who is currently looking for nuclear option. It's conducted with input from scientists from the region. So near the entrance, also it has colorful and informative infographics. Near veterans, there is a printed preview files and also full full report for preview options. So please take your time, have a look, and also you can download it from the website in high resolution with all infographics and everything. Of course, thank you. Right now I'd like to speak with the audience about problems of financing huge infrastructural projects in energy sphere and first of all in nuclear field. So next slide please. Yes, Russia is one of the world's leading nuclear exporters, as you may probably know. It controls 40% of the global market for uranium enrichment, 17% of the market for nuclear fuel, and 25% for nuclear power plants construction abroad. Currently, there are 38 reactors of Russian design in operation in 10 foreign countries, including post-Soviet countries. Export contracts generate about a third of Rosatom revenues. In 2011-2014, Russian nuclear industry aggregate revenues stood at more than $18 billion. It fulfilled annually about $5 billion worth of contracts in 2014. The target for 2016 revenues from foreign contracts was $9 billion. And by the December of 2015, Rosatom had held in its portfolio contracts worth of $110 billion for long-term construction projects abroad. So, being a huge exporter of nuclear power plants and fuel cycle services, Rosatom was trying to elaborate a universal model for these kind of projects abroad. Next slide, please. Yes. I am using in my presentation actually the infographics from the report I mentioned, so you may find it useful to take a closer look later. So right now, Rosatom have 25 reactors in different stages of construction in 12 countries all around the world, and you can see it on this slide. Being a huge exporter, Rosatom was constantly polishing its models for contract signing, for contract implementation, and for models of financing. Next slide, please. Yes, up to the second part of 2010s, the main type of contract to build NPP by Russian design abroad was so-called EPC contract, engineering, procurement, and construction. This type of contract was used in cases when the customer country already had the experience of NPP operation. When it had necessary nuclear infrastructure, it includes not only regulations and special laws, but also trained personnel both on the operation and regulatory levels. Examples of this kind of projects are Bushehr NPP, the first operating nuclear power plant unit in the Middle East, and 2 more to come in next 10 years. Kudankulam NPP in India and Tianwan NPP in China. For example, during the construction of Kudankulam, Indian side was implementing construction, installation, and even pre-commissioning activities all by itself. And Russia was only providing necessary equipment and nuclear and safety-related equipment. For Tianwan NPP, Chinese side was responsible for all civil construction and even elaborated additional design requirements. In these conditions, it was easier for Russia just to provide necessary equipment and train some specific positions for operating staff. But when these kind of countries with developed and even sophisticated experience in nuclear infrastructure all these countries were already having some kind of projects, and the market was open for newcomers, the countries which actually doesn't have developed infrastructure or lack it absolutely, for example. Next slide, please. Yes, contractual models, next slide, where was about engineering, procurement, construction, and next one. To move the EPC contract as a main type of contract implemented by Rosatom, where was so-called integrated offer presented. Here you can see the web of what Rosatom can really offer to any country which is eager to obtain a nuclear power plant on its territory. So it is very adaptable. So it depends really on the current level of developed infrastructure in the country. But Rosatom being having a full fuel cycle can offer a huge any services related to nuclear power plant construction, starting from the construction itself, personal training, providing necessary amendments to regulatory and national law frameworks, providing nuclear fuel for the whole lifetime of the object of a nuclear power plant, and even taking back the spent fuel, which is a huge competitiveness point to Rosatom, and also decommissioning and making the decommissioned site greenfield. This kind of integrated offer was used during the during the next set of contracts. For example, in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, where Rosatom signed agreements to construct an NPP, where was used an integrated offer which included everything that the newcomer country may need to safely construct and operate a nuclear power plant. For the next period, starting with 2010, Rosatom started to think more globally, I think. Rosatom said that it's not enough to have a huge competitiveness on the nuclear market, but a good thing there may be to go for competitiveness on the global electricity market. The idea, next slide please, yes, this one, please return. The previous, yes. The idea was to prognosticate the price for kilowatt per hour from the beginning of the project realization to the very end of the project, I mean decommissioning and returning the place to the green side. So there were two projects in which Rosatom was experimenting with this kind of contractual type. The first is ACU, where Rosatom took the opportunity and used BOO, Build, Own, Operate scheme, the very first time in the nuclear industry worldwide. So this scheme is used for energy infrastructure projects, but never was used for the nuclear infrastructure projects. So by this, can we go a little bit further? Next slide, and next one, and next one, and next one. Yes. For this type of contract, Rosatom not only training the personnel, giving advices on how to upgrade regulatory and law framework of customer nation, but only taking the responsibility of operating the nuclear power plant on its own and having all the responsibilities for the safety and security of nuclear power plant. This type of project in ACU, in Turkey, ACU NPP, involves Rosatom as a main investor and the time for return of investment is prolonged for the time. So right now Russia has already put $3.5 billion into that project. And the first return of that investment, if a project will be continued, is expected by the middle of 20s, when the first reactor will be operating and giving electricity to the grid. So the second type of project which used this kind of investment from the Russian side was the Hanhikivi project in Finland, and now we need to go previous, but to the previous slides. Next, previous, that one. Here in Finland, actually these two projects have a lot of similarities. In Finland, Russia is using EPC contract, but also involved in equity funding. In Finland, there is a special regional model of financing of huge infrastructure projects. It's called Mankala Prize. Due to that type of project, every investor receives the discount on the final electricity in direct proportion to the amount of its investment. So the more money you pay during the beginning of a project, the bigger discount you have when the project is in operation, when the object is in operation. So here you can see how what strength may be in this type of project. While the prognosticated market price for electricity will be rising and rising through the years, nuclear power plant Khanhikivi already has a stabilized price for the kilowatt per hour for the next 100 years of its operation, starting from the first connection to the grid and ending to the decommissioning of the site. It's on the basis of equity funding, these kind of projects can be very interesting not only for Finland, where this kind of type of project is quite popular. It makes it makes small players play on the market equal to the bigger electricity sellers. And now we need to go to the next slide. Next, 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 next. Okay, for these several types of projects which Rosatom was implementing and still implementing in the global market, there are 4 different kinds of financing options, as you can see. For the project like we have in Belarus, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Egypt, Russia is given to the customer country state loan. Russia has a special bank, it's a governmental bank called Vneshtorg Bank, and it's the main operator of every state loan credits, especially which are using to construct NPP by Russian design in the customer country. The next, no, not the next slide. The next type of financial involvement of Russian nuclear industry is relatively new, is electric power sales guarantee. So it's mainly the build, own, operate project in Turkey. The third, like I said, will be used in Khanhikivi project and was to be used in Great Britain projects before the Crimea and other cases of deterioration of relations between our countries. It's equity funding when Rosatom not only constructing a nuclear power plant, but also participating as a main or one of the investors. And the fourth, next slide please. Yes, and the next. Yes, and the fourth, also relatively new type of financial participation, but very needed. It's a direct investment by the customer country. For example, right now, for the second and third units of Bushehr NPP, Iran is ready to pay in cash. During the construction of first Bushehr NPP unit, which took more than 20 years to complete, since Russia was integrating the German left equipment to a Russian design nuclear power plant, and also the project itself was under great suppression from the Western countries. First of all, from the United States of America, which was cutting out the main contractors, for example, Ukraine and Czech Republic. Despite all that, Russia successfully completed this project, And one of the obstacles to complete it in fewer time was that Iran was paying not by cash, but some kind of payments were made in by barter. So it was goods and services. Right now, Iran is ready to pay with cash. So for Bushehr units number 2 and 3, were a lot of enthusiasm in Rosatom. Quite recently, for example, for Han Hikivi project, Rosatom get the right to use the Russian Sovereign Welfare Foundation to invest in its projects. Russian Sovereign Welfare Foundation was created during the 2008 crisis, and it was collecting all the revenues from the Russian oil export. So it's, thank you. It's created a significant amount of money which were frozen to anyone. We were just laying somewhere. And in 2014, Russian government gave up to $1 billion from that foundation to use it to power up Rosatom projects. But quite recent, during the high volatility of oil prices, we had a statement from our Deputy Finance Minister, Sergei Starchak. It was quite recently on January 18th, when he said that for the next possible state loans, Russia need to hold back and not given them. For all previous promised loans, for example, for Egyptian NPP, there will be money allocated for that, but not for the next projects, especially in the NPP construction abroad. Next slide, please. Yes, right now Russia involved in the 3 projects in the Middle East. For the Iranian Bushehr NPP, 1 unit is already in operation, and there are active preparations to start the construction of the 2nd and 3rd units. For the Akku NPP, there were also active preparations. Right now, after the deterioration of intergovernmental relations between our countries, there is still an idea that whether or not to go further with this project will be not a political but business decision. Right now, the contractor expecting to have a license for NPP construction itself to start the works on the site, and the main impediment not really the deterioration of political relations after Turkey shot down Russian jet near the Syrian border, but actually the impediment in Turkish law, which prohibit the construction of huge infrastructure objects near the coastline and near the olive forests. And these kind of laws need to be amended, and this is the main obstacle from starting the actual construction. So next slide, please. Yes, next slide. And next. Yes, also there are severe security problems in the Middle East, for example, for the construction of El Daba NPP in Egypt. There are all the papers, I mean, intergovernmental agreements on construction, intergovernmental agreement on state loan. This is all in place, but still the project require a thoughtful discussion on whether or not it should be able to construct an NP in such a political and security obstacles. Also, the impediment with Turkey NPP construction, but as our president said in December during his big press conference, in spite of all of deterioration, the question of whether or not to go further with Akku NPP construction will be a business decision made on corporate level, not the governmental one. Next slide, please. Yes, like I said, downfall of hydrocarbon prices forced Russia to hold on with further credit loans, state loans to other countries for the implementation of Russian infrastructure projects. Right now we need to check our budget, and only after that we will be going forward with new state loans agreements. But this will not affect already signed agreements, for example, like in the case of Egypt or Belarus or Bangladesh or Vietnam and others. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attention. Please forward me any questions or ask any questions you have right now. Check our preview files from our report on the prospects for nuclear power in the Middle East. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. So we will have microphones available for those who have questions. When you have a question, please introduce yourself, because we'd like to know, our audience would like to know your interest as well. So the floor is open for discussion. I don't know, Rami, you want to carry the microphones? Yeah. Okay, any questions? Yeah, Sami, and then
Sami Karaki from the American University of Beirut. I would like to hear maybe Mr. Konukov about the decommissioning cost. Nothing was said about that, and how significant is it?
We will collect several questions, so we'll be...
so decommissioning. Yes, Dr.
Ghassan Shahab, the American University of Beirut. My question is for Mr. Ayoub. Among the risks listed, you didn't really list the geopolitical risks and the tensions in the region. Of course, you have the occupants in Israel. They could, the location that you selected is kind of close to the border. So how are you going to evaluate this? I mean, how are you going to look at this? And do you think, global powers will allow Jordan to get that kind of technology? And the second, in terms of demand, you're also very close to the West Bank, and West Bank and you are very integrated kind of, and there's a lot of interaction. Do you think that it would have been a good idea to just estimate a bit partial supply of power to the West Bank? Thank you.
All right, my question is also directed to Mr. Ayoub. Dr. Dimitri mentioned that currently Russia is putting on hold all the projects, including the Jordanian project. So I was wondering, have you considered...
Excuse me, Ali, not the projects, but state loan to any new projects.
Right, but I think Jordan would be 50% sponsored by Russia, right?
Well, that is not a state loan, that's joint investment. It's other type of financing.
All right, okay. So I think, well, in that case, I just want to ask Mr. Ayoub if Jordan is contemplating, perhaps for any different reasons, other suppliers of nuclear technology than Russia, and if this is the case, what are the options? Thank you.
Okay, I think we can start the answers, and then we'll take in more questions. So would you like Dr. Rakan to answer the two questions, and then we'll ask Dimitri to consider the decommissioning cost.
The first question was regarding
the microphone close.
Yes, I believe you had.
The geopolitical
Yes.
risk and then the demand, electricity demand
Okay.
in the West Bank.
This geopolitical risk. I'm gonna answer this as good as I can. I'm a finance man, but this geopolitical risk is this project is 60 years. This project is 60 years. It's for 60 years. So basically, if you're gonna build a project for 60 years, any project, and you're gonna start hindering it or stopping it, take into consideration geopolitical risks from the go, and giving them a big heavy weight, then for every project you're going to build, the things happen. 60 years ago, there are countries that were at world wars. Now, I understand it's very important, but if you're going to go ahead with the project, and this is a very vital and a very important project for your country, the risks that are right now major are going to probably disappear and go away in 4 or 3 years. Now, I'm a finance man. There are people who are going to evaluate geopolitical risk, but that's my take on it. You cannot stop a project that's 60 years because of geopolitical risk. Maybe 3-year project, yes, but not 60. Especially it's not very vital.
But the nuclear technology is much more sensitive and much more vulnerable to geopolitical risks than, say, natural gas power plants.
I disagree.
Okay.
Because if you look at nuclear power plants, they're much more protected and much safer than pipelines, for example, for gas that blow up every year. Now again, I'll tell you, the army is, as far as Jordan is concerned, this is a first of a kind, and as far as the security of the plant and security of the premises, it's the army. This is going to be protected. It's going to be a very safe place. Now the second, which is actually my
The West Bank.
There's already a connection between us and the West Bank. So as far as between us and the West Bank, there is already electricity going back and forth. So it's not going to be we will be exchanging electricity. Jericho is already being supplied by Jordan. So we're not going to have a problem. I mean, whatever we're going to be producing in Jordan, Al-Kahraba, the Jordan electricity grid, is going to be supplying part of the West Bank without any, there's not going to be an international agreement or whatever, because part of the grid is already there, part of the West Bank. So that's a given. I mean, that's as far as technical is concerned.
So thank you for a very interesting question about decommissioning costs. For the customer country, which ordered WNPP construction by Russia, there will be no additional decommissioning costs. All the decommissioning costs included to the initial project price. For example, the current market price for Russian-designed nuclear power unit is right now from the $4 to $6 billion. Once the customer country paid or got a state loan to cover this sum, the decommissioning costs will be included to that sum. But there is a very interesting thing, because the following thing. Russia is going to understand only right now how to actually decommission our power units, nuclear power units, in Russia territory. Because usually it's easier to just prolong the operation of a nuclear power plant. Standard lifetime of nuclear power unit is 60 years. But due to the fact that it's easier to prolong than to decommission, usually, and that's why the prognosticated price for electricity is going to near 100 years, because due to the fact that nuclear power unit most likely will normally operate even after its standard lifetime, not to 60 years but to 80 years. Most likely it will be prolonged in operation. Right now in Russia, several NPP units in Leningrad IS and in I can't exactly say what town it is, but up to 3 to 4 nuclear power plants will be decommissioning in Russia in next 10 years. So these operations by decommissioning these power units will, after that, we will have an answer on how much we need resources and money to actually decommission one nuclear power unit and put the territory to the green side place. So, but for the, like I said, for the customer country, all the charges for the decommissioning is already in the contract. Unlike, for example, the fuel supply contracts. In fuel supply for the lifetime of a nuclear power plant unit is a different contract in Rosatom's logic.
Thank you. There was another question about Jordan contemplating other types of energy supply. Wasn't that your question?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
We have, there is, as you know, as far as choosing a supplier or a vendor, this is a tender. So it's not. This was a 2-year competitive bid, and it started off with 7 or 8, and it was taken down to 3 with criteria, very stringent criteria, many points, and a bunch of experts evaluating them. Went down to 3, to the Canadians, the Russians and the French, and then it went down to the Russians. I mean, this was done quite stringently and to a boring detail, actually, to add that.
Yeah.
So this was done. I mean, going right now and saying I want somebody else, we've pretty much done everybody that can actually
Well,
is on offer.
Yeah. I have a question. Like there was the mention of having a law about the site of a nuclear power plant. Like in Turkey, you say it shouldn't be on the coastal line or near the forest. Do you have these restrictions in Jordan as well? I mean,
as far as laws, we have, you know, there are some laws as far as being close to the border or so. But the thing is, we had the first site we had was Aqaba, and it was a suitable site as far as being close to the coastline, but it was prohibitive because seismically you had to have it on a hill, which was economically prohibitive, and safety-wise, as far as pumping water was, you know, technically it was prohibitive. So as far as like Turkey, no, not to that specifics, no.
Mr. Savak, do you want to comment on this? No? Okay. Yes.
My name is Nadra Barkatullah. I just have a question on regarding Jordan. I think from the presentation I wasn't sure. Is a project company being established already?
It's established.
It is established. So the phase 1 has been initiated.
Yes,
and as per the IEA 19, the milestones that they have in terms of which stage are you in? Because I think it was very.
We're somewhere in between. They're not drawn in line. I think we're somewhere in the second one. I think there are things we're in the second, and there are things we're finishing the first. I think.
So the bid evaluations, have they happened?
Yeah, the bid evaluations have been completed. We're working on actually defining the project itself with our vendor. So we're on some issues as far as regulatory, we're done. On issues as far as financing, we're on the second. As far as things as far as infrastructure, we're closing up the first, getting into the second. So there, you know, as far as a newcomer, you can't be in one to the second. So you have to. We're somewhere in the curve of first finishing stuff, and some in second, close to the, you know, it's somewhere there.
Okay. Another question is for the Mr. Dimitris. In terms of, because Russia has been financing quite a lot of projects as I see, like, you know, and while also working at the IEA as well. In terms of the export credit agency finance, that is like extremely important for the bankability of most of the nuclear power plant projects. How much is really that you provide financing for? Because generally it's like more than 75%. So that was my question in terms of how much do you provide financing of the loan content of the export equipment that you do? Is it, and
In percentage or
in percentage term, the
Uh-huh.
loan?
So, should I
Yeah.
answer?
Dr.
No, it's in general. I mean, for most of the projects. I mean, Export Credit Agency, do you have a feel? Maybe you can, if you don't know about it, but I thought generally it is because that is quite important for most of the Export Credit Agency. They generally provide 85%, and I wasn't sure how much does your Export Credit Agency they provide in terms of the financing, because, yeah.
Well, first of all, I don't think I know the percentage, but as I following the simple logic, I think Russia is giving 100% of amount which is needed to finance a project. For example, current price of one NPP unit is around $5 billion, from 4 to 6, and for the projects in Belarus, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and even Egypt, the announced amount of state loan to be provided to these countries was actually around 10 billion. Yes. The thing is, Russia sees providing of state of I don't know, taxpayers' money for projects from the first few in other countries. But the main, there is also a simple logic on the background of these decisions, because every ruble provided for the huge infrastructure projects abroad will generate up to 2 to 3 rubles in Russian GDP by placing orders, creating workplaces and guaranteeing these workplaces for the amount of time. So that was also the logic for using the restricted for any other corporations or purposes funds of Russian Sovereign Welfare Foundation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. I have other questions, but I'll...
Yes, Mr. Bustani? No? Yes.
From Maher Harb Center for Environmental Research. Now, to Mr. Dimitri, after Chernobyl and other nuclear accidents, I mean, I can see the enthusiasm by Mr. Dimitri about spreading the nuclear power. I mean, it's true that Dr. Ayub said it's safer than other forms. However, if we compare it to renewables, alternative energy, I think, the comparison is not there. Thank you.
Would you like to answer?
Was it? Yes, okay, I can comment on that. The thing is, every big accident on nuclear power plants, including Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima, was a mistake of operators, of a human factor, and second, it's very hard to actually recreate it for the second time. For example, as for Fukushima, the amount of different how to say
technology,
the amount of
safety measures,
separated incidents like tsunami, the degradation of electricity production to the cooling system, the human factor when the Japanese experts were holding back and not providing sufficient additional power to the cooling system. it is very situational and it's very hard to recreate. Both Chernobyl and Fukushima events upgraded not only Russian but worldwide criteria for nuclear power reactors generation. Right now, all of the main manufacturers and exporters, including Russia, South Korea, France and Japan, upgraded their standards for the 3+, so-called 3+ generation. And these bad news for China. For the next 5 to 10 years, China will not be able to provide not additional to build power reactors by its design abroad, not counting Pakistan, where it's already a big history of cooperation. So for current projects, there are some sensitivities. For example, Iran is a very seismic country itself, but the chosen places like Bushehr and forgot the second, so-called seismic proof, and the design of reactor building itself, and every sub-system is also capable of withstanding the seismic activity of up to 8, 9 balls on the Richter scale.
Okay. My question is related also to this. My question is to Mr. Rakan. It's about I noted that the 3 sites, or two or three sites that are proposed for the future power plants in Jordan are not too far away from Aqaba port or from the Dead Sea. And as you know, there is a huge fracture system on the Earth's crust that extends from the southern part of the Red Sea all along the length of the Red Sea, about 2,000 kilometers, continuing along the Gulf of Aqaba, Dead Sea, and here in Lebanon, it continues along the Bekaa Valley. This is a huge fracture system called structural geology fault system that is seismically active. And the sites selected are about maybe 20 to 30 kilometers not far away from Aqaba and the Dead Sea. And I'm just wondering if there's any geological risk assessment has been done to avoid earthquakes and all that, given what happens in Japan in 2011 and all the tsunamis and all the destruction. Why not selecting sites away from to the furthest east border in Jordan, near Iraq, away from that seismically active zone? And I understand the problem of you need a lot of volume of water for cooling, but also you have that seismic risk. So I'm just wondering if you have if you can shed some light on this.
Actually, we've done that exactly. The sites, the first sites that were selected were closer because of the proximity to the wastewater treatment plant, etc., and also the Aqaba plant because of the sea. The site right now, which is the Amra site, is about 70 kilometers inland, about not 20, about 50 or 60 kilometers, 50 kilometers inland from that fault, about over 45 or 50 kilometers. So you're absolutely correct. That was taken into consideration after the Fukushima. The countrywide survey was revised, and the technical boys went back to work and the drawing table and looked at all the sites. Jordan was taken inch by inch, and they found this is the better suited site because of that issue and because of the issue of the disparity of the people. Nobody lives there, literally. So it was a better place, better area. The only issue was that it's there's 60 kilometers from the water, which is basically not a problem because Palo Verde is also 60 kilometers from the water, and it's been working for like 30 years now.
Excuse me. Ramzi Nasser from ACE Consulting. A question to Mr. Ayub.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we are similar to the Jordanian public regarding our resistance to atomic energy, what were the elements of the HR? I mean, how did you convince the Jordanian public that in a small country like Jordan, relatively small country, you could have a safe atomic energy? Just quickly, I mean, how did you convince them?
I'm going to speak right now as a Jordanian, not as anybody from JAC. Before 2008, 2007, when this was brought up, and there was resistance, but then the issue with energy started coming up. The problem 2010, 2011 was weaker, when we had billions and billions in the newspapers coming in on our book because of the interruption of the gas from Egypt. And it was in the news. It was in the newspapers with big red line. Jordan, NEPCO is incurring 1 billion in debt because of there is no, and we had to use heavy fuel. I think it was the people in Jordan realized that it is not a matter of we like nuclear or not. It's a matter that this is very costly. So some of the people who were against it because of the fact that it's nuclear started to look at it as this is expensive. I mean, if I don't want to take the bus because I don't like it, it's one thing. But if it's costing me not taking the bus, you know what? I'm going to take the bus. This is what it was. There are a lot of people in Jordan who are against nuclear, and you know what? That's their opinion. But that 2 years, 2.5 years were very expensive for Jordan. Very, very expensive. $5 billion added to our debt. So that actually made a difference for some people, as far as opinion is concerned, and of course our work. And nuclear has a particular to it that you have to actually teach people about it because it's not simple. I mean, it doesn't mean people are simpletons. Even if you are a heart surgeon, doesn't mean you know about nuclear reactors. You have to just give them, the know-how about it, and it takes time.
Thank you, Dr. Rakan. We ran a little bit out of time, but we can continue some of the questions over a 10-minute or maximum 15 minutes coffee break. You can grab your coffee and we'll start our next panel on trends and finance, technologies, trends and financing models. I'd like to thank our guest speakers here for their informative presentation and also for their answers of questions. And those who have more questions, they can actually talk to them.
Hi again, my name is Ali Ahmad. I am a research fellow in energy policy at the Woodrow Wilson School for Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. I'm also a visiting scholar and lecturer here at AUB. So turning now to technologies that can fill the gap between supply and demand of electricity in the region, their trends, their economic competitiveness against traditional sources, and the financing models involved in these technologies. It's really a great pleasure and privilege for me to moderate this panel. We are lucky to have four distinguished speakers with extensive knowledge and experience in their respective fields. So to ring out the discussion on nuclear, our first speaker is Dr. Nadira Barakatullah. Dr. Nadira is a specialist economist in infrastructure financing and regulated utility industries. She has more than 20 years of experience in applying economic concepts and conducting quantitative analysis while working on projects around the globe. The experience includes advising both governments and major organizations. As Director of Economic Regulation for Regulation and Supervision Bureau, RSB in Abu Dhabi, she advised on various strategic infrastructure projects. Before joining RSB, Dr. Nadira worked for the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. Dr. Nadira has a master's degree in economics from Carnegie Mellon University in the USA and a PhD in economics from the University of Sydney, Australia. Dr. Nadira, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Ali. What I will say is that I'll actually, you already have heard this morning about nuclear. And my presentation that I'm going to discuss today is not very country specific because you've got the views from from two countries, and one is more on international basis as well, but another one very specific to the Jordan case. So I'll talk about a question that I also hear a lot as well. What is so special about financing nuclear power projects? And most of the work, most of the presentation, I mean, this is mainly based on the work that I conducted or I undertook at the International Atomic Energy Agency when I was working there. And basically based on the financial risk management workshops, which I pioneered there, mainly the initiative towards having the capacity planning and mainly for the newcomer companies was that they wanted to mainly understand what are the challenges associated to financing nuclear power projects and how can these challenges be overcome. So let me share with you some of the questions that I used to get really asked. How much would it cost to build a nuclear power project? What are the IEA cost estimates? Why such a wide range of costs as well? And why do the investment costs differ from country to country? What is the localization rate? How can we finance nuclear power projects? Why is the cost of finance for nuclear high? And why is there risk premium? Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So in terms of answering, like the answer to these questions, my response was, well, in order to understand these issues, one has to understand the economics of nuclear. So yes, nuclear has advantages. We have heard some of them as well this morning. It is relatively low on fuel cost. In terms of price stability, yes, levelized cost basis, if you're talking about that, it is pretty stable in terms of the performance of the nuclear reactors, 90% or more, you hear in some cases. And long lifetime, 60 years, and now I'm hearing even more than 60 years. So basically an asset that you have for more than 3 generations. So it is fairly strategic investment. And then that also brings in security of energy supply and clean source of energy, so low in emissions too, and economic development. One of the recent ones that I heard was that in the case of UK, Hinkley Point C is going to add nearly 25,000 jobs to basically the country, so obviously a contribution to the GDP. But obviously there are some challenges. So let's talk about some of the challenges. Highly capital intensive, like other big infrastructure assets, nuclear is also capital intensive. That brings in the sensitivity to the interest rate as well, long lead times, long payback periods, because some of the commercial banks, what they want to see is that they want to have a payback after about 5 years or in times less. So more than 5 years, obviously, that is an issue for nuclear. Then construction cost uncertainty, deregulated electricity market risk, that basically the dispatch risk, and the regulatory policy issues. Now, I won't discuss all of them given the limited time I have, but I've listed them. But in order, these are the challenges that, yes, the nuclear industry faces. And in order to entice new investors, obviously, you have to have new financing arrangements in place. And these financing and these challenges regarding the financing are not actually made any easier by the financial crisis of 2008, which you already have heard about, and the Fukushima event of 2011, which obviously you have heard about as well. And neither, and basically the current conditions in the global market and the basically the growth, the global demand growth down by the IMS as well, of basically all the countries, about nearly 0.3%, is also not making it any easier to raise finance, because that would obviously have any liquidity in the market will be affected as well. Now, from the highly capital intensive cost structure, well, if you look at base load generation and nuclear, I would like to compare it mainly to the base load generation. In terms of capital intensive, yes, nuclear is capital intensive. If you want to put the dollar values, say for overnight cost for a typical 1,000 megawatt of a nuclear power plant, they range from about 2 billion to about nearly 8 billion. So yes, quite a significant investment. But if we look at it from the macroeconomic point of view, 45% of the countries have their GDP below 20 billion. And if you look at the Middle East, 40% of the countries basically have their GDP below 50 billion. Now for those countries, to put a couple of nuclear power plants on their balance sheet would be a fair challenge. What would that do? Basically,
specifically for those ones who have their gross debt to GDP percentage more than 50%, that would obviously be fairly challenged. Even for the leading utilities who have nuclear assets, if you look at the market capitalization of the leading utilities, like for the likes of GDF Suez, or if you're talking about Duke Energy in the US, what would that do? It would obviously bring in credit rating pressure. And basically what I mean by that is that any credit rating below BBB minus, obviously it leads to an increase in cost of finance, and it makes financing quite challenging. Now, one of the other questions in terms of the capital intensity, if we look at the basically the investment costs, and this was actually one of the questions that I used to get generally asked, was that how much would it really cost to build a nuclear power plant? And I used to put up this slide, I mean, and I still do. I mean, there is no one answer. Every project is quite unique. There are quite wide ranges, as you can see, across the different regions. And in terms of, so it's very important to understand what does this entail. And what I have here on the slide are the overnight costs of different plants. And overnight cost basically includes EPC cost, contingency costs, and owner's cost. And in terms of how much basically are, and the wide ranges that you can see over there, it is important to understand that, yes, how much is the owner's content in there and how much is the contingency cost in there, but also one has to understand whether it is a first-of-a-kind plant or not. Because if it's first-of-a-kind plant, then obviously it can add up to about 30% to the overnight cost, plus whether it's on a greenfield site and whether it is on an existing site, that does make a difference. What is the size of the reactor? And obviously all those factors, in fact, the localization content is also another factor that does make a difference. And because you can see that the costs coming out of Asia, and most of these are depictive of the plants that are being constructed in China, have a very high localization content, in some cases about more than 80%. So, or very recently I heard a case of about more than 90%. So that obviously is depictive of lower input costs, which is reflected in the lower overnight cost as well. And from the point of view of one of the highly rated risk, and most of the workshops that I've conducted and most of the sessions that I have had, and even in discussion with the financiers on most of the projects, one of the mostly highly rated risk in the nuclear industry is the construction risk. So why do we really worry about the construction risk? Well, let's first talk about it from the point of view. I mean, I'm an economist. So for us economists, overnight costs, yes, it is very good as a base costs, but we want to know about the time value of money. So when the time value of money comes into play, that's when the interest during construction kicks in. So if we say at 5% and 6-year construction duration, what does that do to the overnight cost? Then if we want to say 10% interest and 6-year construction, obviously that adds a fair increment to the overnight cost. And if we say there is another 2 years delay, 5% and 10%, these obviously add to the overnight cost. And what do we see really across the globe for the nuclear power plants that are under construction? I've got some cases over here for you. You have initial costs, then you have additional costs, and in some cases, fourth addition being added on to that. Plus also, not only that, the news in the media, they don't help either. And you can see what I mean. If you're talking about South Korea, 3 years delay, US as well, Finland as well, France. So these particular instances, they really don't help. And what happens? Credit downgrades by the credit agencies. And some cases, like Moody's, basically, if any particular company, they want to build a nuclear power plant, what they say is that they basically try to give it, before it has been decided, a credit negative. And why does that happen? Because of the construction history. basically it is frequent overruns, is what the answer is. When I have asked the credit rating agency, why do they do that? Well, they want to basically see some plants that are constructed on time and within budgets. And we are seeing some success stories that are coming out in the Asia as well, where plants are being constructed in 6 years or in 5 years. And I've got some examples for you over there. And yes, there are other challenges as well. Given the limited time, I'm really not going to talk about these challenges. But one thing I would really like to say is that, yes, large infrastructure assets have their challenges. And the main thing is that, what do we see really around the world? If we look at the current status of the nuclear reactors, there are 441 reactors in operation, most of them in North America and in Europe. And there are 67 reactors which are currently in construction, though most of them are under construction in Asia and Far East, and 50% of those are constructed in China. Not only that, what are the investors looking at? The reactors that are currently under construction? They're looking at full asset utilization as well. In South Korea, a 10-year life extension. In Bulgaria, another 20-year life extension. And in other cases, even more than 20-year life extensions. And even beyond is what I heard very latest. Not only that, why are really investors interested in building nuclear power projects? Well, they also see on a lifetime basis that nuclear and a levelized cost electricity, because it is spanned over 3 generations. So it's not just a one-off type of a commitment that will be only for 10 years or 20 years. They find it quite a lucrative type of an investment. So obviously, there are ways to finance nuclear power projects. And the financing that generally is either government financing or industry financing. Government financing is, I'll just talk about some of the examples, is state budget. This has been the traditional type of government financing that has been happening, which is through the tax revenue. And then government can put in their equity as well, PPA. Loan guarantees, export credit agencies, we have heard that this morning as well. Guaranteed purchasing power agreements is another form. And long-term infrastructure bond issuance is also going on at the moment as well. Now, in terms of, I'll just discuss some of the examples of these one. Government equity and ownership. This is in case of the UK, Hinkley Point C. Yes, it's EDF and the China General Nuclear Corporation have put in stakes in order to build Hinkley Point C, and also in case of Sizewell as well, they want to do that. And sovereign loan guarantees are also there in the case of US Department of Energy loan to their project. And then the UK guarantee scheme as well to a couple of nuclear power plants that are being built over there, especially the Hinkley Point C one, very latest, £2 billion of government guarantee. That's a fairly significant commitment from the government. Not only that, to most of the financiers that I have had discussions or I have really talked to, they say export credit agency finance, or it's sometimes also known as trade finance, is extremely important for the viability of nuclear power projects. Basically, what does that mean? It's trying to promote your domestic companies in order to, and trying to promote exports. Now, why is it really important was my question as well, is that, well, some of the key features that these export credit agencies, they provide in terms of financing are very much more comparable to the nuclear asset because it's long-term as well, and very attractive fixed interest rates, high loan amount as 85% of the goods that are being exported, and low total costs, because if the cost of finance is higher, then the total costs will also be lower. And most of the export credit agencies, and I've got some examples for you there, they do provide that. But what has been really happening is that the budgets of the government are really tightening. And what are they looking towards? Because what funds that they have, they would rather like to spend it on social projects, which is health and education. So they have been looking towards the private sector in order to finance these projects, as you have heard in the case of Turkey this morning as well, and in case of other discussions that we have had. governments are really seeking private sector to come and to fund these assets. I mean, like other big infrastructure assets. And for nuclear industry, corporate finance or balance sheet financing has been happening. Investor finance, yes. And there are some new financing trends, and I'll briefly talk about them, but project finance is really not available for nuclear in terms of pure form. Why? Because of the construction history. That is one of the main reasons, because in project finance, what you have is the cash stream, basically the cash flow coming from the project is the collateral that the financier look towards. And if the project construction delays happen, obviously that get affected. So pure project finance for the nuclear industry has really not been there. So let's talk about corporate finance. I'll just discuss some brief examples. In terms of corporate finance, as you know, it is basically balance sheet finance where the company can put the assets that it wants to build on its balance sheet. Example I'm giving over here is EDF. The Flamanville 3 project, yes, initially at 3.3 billion, but then cost overruns, and now it's nearly about 10.5 billion. Obviously, not a very interesting story. What has happened? Moody's downgrade and the share price plunge. So what is really, and the investors are looking towards, what the financiers are looking towards is risk diversification and more partnership so that really one entity does not take the entire risk. And one of the examples, and you heard this morning about Mancala price, is I'll talk about the Mancala model very briefly because quite a lot of people do ask me about what is this Mancala model. And I'll actually explain in terms of my understanding of the Mancala model is. Well, you have a Mancala company that you establish, and the shareholders are government and private, which is like you have the municipalities and large industrial users. They put in the equity into the Mancala project company. And what they have rights to is the electricity that's produced, and the operational cost and the debt service is provided to the Mancala company. The lenders and the financiers provide the debt, and the debt service is provided by the Mancala company, and the completion risk is shared by the shareholders and by the lenders. Not only that, the EPC contractor also shares the completion risk. And on top are the regulators, whether we are talking about safety regulators or about the price regulators, they foresee the project. This is the project, this is basically the type of investor finance model that has been happening in case of Olkiluoto 3 and also in case of Henkivi project as well. And some of the other European countries are also looking towards this in terms of risk diversification as an interesting and quite a model that they would like to take on. And what else is going on? And in terms of financing, vendor financing still continues, and you've heard that this morning too. Whether we are talking about it from the debt point of view, and some examples I have for you over there, or putting in equity, which is in case of some on the AP 1000 plant in case of Bulgaria as well. But in addition to that, as we had looking for strategic partners, and I won't really discuss that more because you already heard Jordan case, which is looking forward towards strategic partner with the Russian Rosatom, who has been putting in the money in this particular project. But not only that, further risk diversification is also going on in case of the Turkey project as well, Sinop, where basically 3 vendors together are putting in the equity stake in there, so not one. And I had an answer. And basically, this was my question, and I got an answer to that will this be similar to the Ukuyu project? And yes, it was confirmed this morning by Mr. Dimitri that yes, that will be similar to the Ukuyu project, which is a build, own, and operate scheme. Now, in addition to that, the other financing type of methods that are going on really is that the investors are also tapping into the capital markets and issuance of the bonds, whether we are talking about that or actually offering initial public offerings. And I've listed for you, I'm really not going to read it, but these are just some examples that yes, it is happening in the capital markets as well. And what do we really see? Just putting it all together, what I just wanted to share with you, that what are the trends that we are really trying to see over here? Government financing, yes, it is there, and it will continue. Corporate finance, yes, for those who have got big, beefy balance sheets, for those companies, it will be easy. And what else are we seeing? Cooperative model, investor finance model, or vendor finance modeling is happening. In addition to that, strategic partners is obviously going on. Now, and then project finance. Pure project finance, as I've said, is not available, but a combination of either of those is basically there. But the trend that we are seeing over here, and as you can see over here, on the x-axis I have ownership transferability from public to private, and on the y-axis, risk transferability from the public to private. So that is basically the trend and the in the financing that we are really trying to observe. Now, finally, but yes, government support in all those cases for nuclear has to be there. So in conclusion, what can I say? Yes, government has a critical role to play because it's a fairly long-term commitment. Wide range of overnight costs is quite daunting for new investors. Financing and construction duration are key influencing factors to invest, basically to impact the total investment cost. And the Fukushima event obviously has had an impact on increasing the costs as well because of the enhanced safety measures. Then common financing, yes, I say it still dominates, and export credit agency support is very vital. Vendor financing of both, whether it's debt or equity, is very much in demand, and then owners are also tapping into the capital markets. Strict financial regulation, Basel III, will also have an impact on the liquidity in the market. And obviously, basically for large-scale infrastructure assets, whether we are talking about nuclear or other, it will have an impact on that too. Financing of nuclear power plants is challenging, and financing of large infrastructure assets is challenging. And not only for nuclear, I've covered and I've come across this in other infrastructure, large-scale assets as well. But yes, new trends are emerging, and it's doable, as you can see from the examples I've shared with you. But in terms of the nuclear industry, what they really want to see and what the financiers really want to see is that for the project finance to happen as well, to be built, more plants built on time and within budget as well, so to have less and less cost overruns. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Nadira. And now moving on from nuclear to renewables, our next speaker is Mr. Monji Bida, who is going to talk about current trends in financing renewable energy projects in the Arab region. So Mr. Monji Bida joined the UN ISQA in November 2011 as the first Economic Affairs Officer in the energy section of the Sustainable Development Policies Division, where he contributes to the services and support that ISQA provides to its member countries in the field of sustainable energy, with a special focus on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and energy security issues and policies. Prior to his appointment, he built up over 20 years of experience as a senior expert and professional engineer. He was involved in the development of many energy efficiency and renewable energy policies and programs for the Tunisian government. Mr. Monji holds a master's degree in building energy and system engineering and a PhD degree from the same school in building engineering, and also holds a first degree from the École Nationale de Tunis in Tunisia. Mr. Monji.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Thank you, Dr. Ali.
I think, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ali, and thank you for the invitation to be here. What I'm going to talk about today essentially is the role of policy instruments and the institutional instruments in setting up the trends for financing renewable energy. Renewable energy, the role of government is really central in promoting the investments in renewable energy. And this is done This is done basically by creating a comprehensive, favorable regulatory framework context. The main axes of this context are clear and well-defined renewable energy targets. So renewable energy has to be a strategic choice for the government, and they have to announce their targets so that they can give the right signals to investors. They need to have policies that guarantee access of renewable energy to the grid, because if you produce electricity from renewable and then you don't have access to the grid to distribute that electricity, then it's no good. They need to have a set of attractive tariff options for electricity from renewable energy, and this in itself can be part of the financing scheme. They need to have a set of policies to promote direct and decentralized use of renewable energy applications for providing energy services, and this aspect is often overlooked, because when we think about renewable energy, we automatically think about generating power and electricity. But there are many energy services that can be provided directly from renewable energy sources, and these are often decentralized, so we need to have the right schemes to promote such systems and programs. And finally, there is a need for a set of financial incentives and schemes for renewable energy projects. So I'm going to introduce the two first items in the beginning, and then move on to talk about the financing of renewable energy. Presently, the current targets for 2030 in the Arab region indicate an increase of renewable energy contribution by 117 gigawatt of installed capacity of renewable energy sources. This is excluding hydropower. We have 19 Arab states that have announced clear renewable energy targets. And in each country, the range of the share of electricity generation from renewable by 2030 is from 5 to 42%. So we have some countries that have very ambitious programs in terms of renewable energy deployment. And in the last COP21 in Paris, in the intended nationally determined contributions of the different countries, we have 11 Arab countries that included renewable energy as quantitative mitigation targets in their NDCs. So these countries are providing the signals to investors for renewable energy. If we look at take a look at the share of technologies of these projected installed capacity, we find that PV represents 37%, CSP 28%, the same as wind, and 5% for biomass and 2% for geothermal. So again, this sets the tone and tells investors what technologies they're going to be going after. Excuse me. If we look at the guarantee of access of renewable energy to the grid, we see that here we have very few countries that have specific grid access details to renewable energy in their policies and regulations. Algeria, Jordan have the most preferential grid access conditions. The United Arab Emirates Abu Dhabi and Dubai especially, they developed regulations to allow feed-in at household levels. Egypt, Morocco, and Palestine have committed to grant grid access to renewable energy. Tunisia has restrictive grid access, but they are in the process of revising these policies. And most other countries need to develop national policies to guarantee grid access to renewable energy. Otherwise, investors will be taking a risk to invest in renewable energy if they don't have this guarantee of access. Now we move on to tariffs. And again, tariffs can be a mean of financing, not financing, but at least guaranteeing the return on investment and therefore guaranteeing the financing. We have basically three common types of tariffs: the feed-in tariff, the IPP public competitive bidding, and the net metering. And each type of tariff would apply to certain types of technologies and schemes. The most, let's say, advantageous, in a sense, to investors is the feed-in tariff, because it offers long-term electricity purchasing contracts to renewable energy electricity producers and price certainty and long-term agreements. We have 7 countries in the Arab region that adopted or proposed feed-in tariff as a key mechanism for meeting their renewable energy targets. And in many cases, these tariffs are technology specific. However, we have to be careful because in some of the cases, these feed-in tariffs were so advantageous to the investors that they can introduce significant market distortions, and they can be, in a position to deny other contributors to the energy market. So now countries are more careful when they are negotiating their feed-in tariff schemes. The independent power producer public competitive bidding, it's a system of tariff through a tendering process which used to select a renewable energy developer, and after the bidding process we have a power purchase agreement that is signed with the successful bidder. So the tariff is no longer something that is guaranteed from the beginning. It's through a bidding process, and the winner will sign the power purchase agreement. It is one of the most important instruments to promote large-scale renewable energy projects in the region. It requires a very high level of transparency in terms of government's future development plans of renewable energy, and also the competitive bidding process itself. Egypt, Morocco, and Saudi Arabia are the only 3 countries in the region that have set clear targets for the total installed capacity of renewable energy to be developed through a competitive bidding process. The third type of tariffs is the net metering, which is a mechanism to allow individual entities to produce electricity from renewable energy for their own needs, and then to sell the excess production to the power distribution system. The net contribution is evaluated based on the balance between the power obtained from the grid and the power delivered through it. We have 7 Arab countries: Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Tunisia, and the Emirates, Dubai in particular, that have developed such arrangements. But only several of them have actually implemented these schemes. and the schemes differ from one country to another. These schemes are important when you are trying to use small-scale renewable energy systems that is largely distributed. And I know that in Lebanon, there are some experiences in terms of using this scheme, but I'm not sure if the regulation behind is operational yet. Now we go to the financial incentives and schemes for renewable energy projects, and basically it's through public funding or fiscal privileges. So either or we can give both the allocation of fiscal privileges or tax credit to renewable energy, and the creation of special, sustainable, and dedicated energy public funds to partially subsidize renewable energy projects, either directly and or through the use of special credit lines with reduced or zero interest rates. Like in the case in Lebanon, we have a credit line at zero interest rate to finance renewable energy projects. So the need for financial incentives for renewable energy projects depends on their size and their type. Large-scale renewable energy projects would obey the same financial rules as other infrastructure projects. Developers usually rely on international financing mechanisms and schemes, international green funding, for example. And they may benefit from fiscal privileges to alleviate the local costs of the projects. Medium and small-scale renewable energy projects and renewable energy programs based on large dissemination of small renewable energy systems need financial support and incentives. And we'll see a case of such a case. And also we will see what one of the countries, Morocco, have done in terms of setting up a financing scheme, actually a total institutional scheme to finance their renewable energy projects. Dedicated public funds for promoting renewable energy. We have 7 countries in the region: Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, and the Emirates, that have established or are in the process of establishing renewable energy funds. They are often within a common dedicated basket to promote sustainable energy, including renewable energy and energy efficiency. And at least 4 of these countries, namely Algeria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Tunisia, have these funds dedicated to support both renewable and energy efficiency. Fiscal incentives, we can have them through providing tax credits, VAT and custom duties waivers or reductions. 8 Arab countries, Algeria, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Palestine, Syria, and Tunisia, offer such incentives. And these incentives are used to encourage renewable energy investments by reducing the overall costs of renewable energy projects. Now, I'm going to finish with 2 examples from the Arab countries. One is for disseminating small-scale renewable energy systems on a large scale. And the other one is for financing large-scale renewable energy systems. First example is from Tunisia, which they basically had 2 nationwide dissemination programs for solar water heaters, ProSol, and for grid-connected PV solar systems, ProSol Elec. And the national fund is used in conjunction with international funding to provide a grant that covers 30% of the cost of the system when purchased from accredited suppliers and installers. It provides loans with preferential interest rates to cover the remaining 70% of the cost of the system. So the fund is used to bonify the interest rates of these loans. And the loans are recovered by the public utility company through the electricity bills. So these are schemes that are targeting households, that are targeting small businesses. So they provide them with this financial scheme that helps them invest in these systems and use them. The second example is from Morocco. It's based on public-private partnership to finance large-scale renewable energy projects. And Morocco is one of the countries with the highest ambitions in terms of renewable energy deployment. They are looking for renewable energy contribution of around 40% by 2030. So what they did is they created a specialized public financing company. It's called the Energy Investment Company. And it's mandated to operate in both the investment and development of renewable energy projects and energy efficiency. It operates as an investor, financial leverage, and project co-developer. And then under this, or in conjunction with this energy investment company, they are creating different companies to invest in the projects themselves. So for renewable energy, another company was created. It's called MASEN, the Moroccan Agency for Solar Energy. It's 25% owned by the government of Morocco, ONE, which is the national utility company, the Hassan II Fund for Economic and Social Development, and the Energy Investment Company. And MASEN is responsible for feasibility assessment, design, development, and financing of solar projects in Morocco, along with contributing to expertise and research in the solar industry. They designed an innovative financing architecture that allows MASEN to play the role of contract holder in the power purchase agreements with ONE, and the role of an equity partner in the solar power company along with the winning bidders. Also, MASEN acts as a consolidator of concessional loans provided by the Clean Technology Fund, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and the European Investment Bank. So this setup reduces the cost of capital for the solar power company and lower the overall cost of energy generated from renewable energy. So these two examples sort of set up the trend of the way you can invest in renewable energy and make sure that you end up with projects that are feasible and are contributing to the energy mix of the countries. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monji. Our next speaker is Dr. Munir Rashid, who is going to talk about power generation, alternative financing models and the risks, a pragmatic approach. Dr. Munir Rashid is the president and a founding member of the Lebanese Economic Association. In this capacity, he addressed many important public issues, including reform of the power sector, health, and pension. He is also a World Bank fiscal advisor for Lebanon and a lecturer at the AUB in the Energy Studies program. In addition, He provides consultancy services to regional and international financial institutions in public financial management, policy evaluation, and financial programming. He is a former International Monetary Fund, IMF, senior economist. His career at the fund spanned through 1981-2007 and focused on policy design and reform and on strategic planning. His responsibilities at the IMF covered several regions, including the Middle East, Africa, and the Caribbean, and served as the IMF resident representative in several countries. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Arizona and majored in financial policies and econometrics. Dr. Rashid.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for your introduction. And thank you all for participating in this important workshop. My presentation is on alternative financing. It doesn't address any particular country, although we can make reference in the question and answer section on potential of applying it to countries, including Lebanon. The presentation is pragmatic, has a simple approach. I start with asking the question, if I want to expand power capacity, electricity, what options do I have?
Sorry, Dr. Rashid, could you please use the other
speak
microphone?
with this?
Yes, thank you.
They are not complaining. Why are you complaining?
I am sorry, I apologize. Okay.
When they complain and switch. So the question we have, like government official or even the private sector or citizen, if we want to expand capacity of production, we know that in Lebanon we have a shortage of 1,000 megawatts. What options do we have? So first of all, I start looking at all these available potential means of producing more power. For instance, when I look, we have the non-renewables and renewables. So I look at these options and assess the difference and try to understand the difference between one and the other. It doesn't mean that production from a non-renewable is better than a renewable. So I have to study it carefully. So if I have this simple, I have four sources of non-renewable, and I have several sources of non-renewable. So I don't want to read them, but there are many, including solar and wind. The second question that I will raise is what do I want to finance? Because we have 4 phases in the power sector. We have the production of kilowatts, we have the transmission, we have the distribution, and we have the collection. Where am I going to put my money? And is it possible for me to share parts of this process with other sectors? So this has to be a clear understanding what I want to do. Okay? So financing, now if I want to look at the financing, so the financing in any investment is linked to the respective cost of the procedure that apply, and I look at the cost relative to the return. So I have to understand what's the cost relative to return in any one of these 10 options that I have. And that's what we will look at. And before I start any production process, I would like to know, is the private sector interested in any particular part of this production process? Historically, we find that the private sector is mostly concerned with production, with power production, less concerned with transmission, distribution, with the power lines, distribution, but they are interested in operating and maintaining, and also in the collection process.
So I find that the main concern of the private sector is in production, as we have seen in other presentations. So now I want to compare the cost and profitability of each one of these systems. The cost is probably standard for most of these alternatives, varies a little bit from one country to the other, but the return, because the tariff policy is a domestic policy. If I have a high tariff rate, I recover the cost. If I don't have a high tariff rate, I may not be able to cover the cost. So it's important to mix the cost with my own policy in terms of making the project feasible or non-feasible. So my concern is initially with the cost, which is not a factor that I control very well. It depends on what type of production I choose. Considering that the revenue I generate depends very much on the tariff rate and many other political factors in my own country. So if I look at the levelized cost of production, we have a simple formula, sum of cost over the lifetime of the plant over sum of electrical energy produced. So I have to do these calculations and compare all these production alternatives. I looked for some sources instead of producing myself. Here it defines the components. It includes everything, the life span of the plant, the cost of fuel, depending on what process I use, and all the components and maintenance and operation of the plant. So when I calculate these, I get this chart. This is a very important chart. It shows the different costs of each process that I'm using, starting from conventional coal up to the hydroelectric. So I have a chart in front of me, gives me the choices that are possible in terms of the cost of production. So I have to look at the cost. There's one caveat here. Perhaps this levelized cost, I have to ask the question, did it take into consideration some elements that are not easily accounted for? For instance, when we're calculating the cost of non-renewable energy, which we know that has an environmental impact, is that factored in the formula? So we can actually take that into account if we want. But if I look at this chart, and this chart is prepared in 2011 dollars for delivery for new production in 2018. And probably there are changes to this chart more recently, because on the left side, most of these are fuel-based, coal and fuel-based, gas-based, and the cost of these energy sources have decreased substantially. So the cost of these components on the left has changed. But if I look at this and I calculate an average cost, I'll find out that really more than half of these production potentials, methods, are not viable economically, looking at the cost relative to other production processes. So I have to make a choice in terms of which one. Of course, if I'm inclined to make a decision, I'll choose the one with the lowest cost, taking into account that I'm factoring in, again, the cost of other elements that are not accounted for in terms of dollars, like environment, depletion of some natural resources like fuel. What's the cost of depleting fuel over the lifetime of my economy or globally? Okay. So these are the important decisions that I have to make. Now, if I want to produce what we call non-dispatchable technologies, means where production is not continuous and interrupted because of their nature, then it means that I have to be willing and ready to subsidize these components. We find that offshore wind is very expensive. We find solar thermal, which Morocco is doing now. Morocco, they will be producing by 2020 about 2,000 megawatts of solar thermal. Solar thermal is about the capital cost is and the levelized cost is about 4 times standard fuel production cost. So then I know that my preference will be related, or my decision is not made on purely economic financial viability basis. At least I have the information in front of me. Okay. Okay. Now these are the numbers that reflect the chart. I don't want to go over them. Now I look at if I make a decision on what I want to select, then the second decision is what's the financing source for me. Right? One basic financing source is the government itself. If I want to finance it from my budget, it means it has to be an item in my expenditure, and then I calculate my revenues and estimate my revenues, then I have a deficit, and then I have to finance the deficit. Some of the deficit financing may be earmarked for the plant itself, especially when it's a loan from an international donor or an international aid agency. So I have commercial sources and I have non-commercial sources. So I have to look at the cost and implication of each one of these. This table here and the breakdown of the financing is very important, because for those of you who are more exposed to economic analysis, they will understand what's the meaning and the difference and the magnitude of the impact of each one of these sources. There are lots of research, and many books have written on these topics. Okay? So we have the commercial and non-commercial. I have to assess whether, if I'm looking for non-commercial, first, for instance, the multilateral and the bilateral, one constraint is their availability. They may not be available to me, readily available. I can finance from the central bank. I know the consequences of the central bank, or then I can market treasury bills. Now we know that in commercial sources, the cost for many countries in the MENA region, excluding perhaps the oil-rich countries, the cost is very high. In Lebanon, we borrow dollars at 6.2, between 6.2 and 6.7, rate of interest 6.2, 6.7, compared to AAA rated security of about 2%. So there's a big difference between the international rates and what we pay ourselves. Okay? Now, there are risks in any type of investment. There are risks. I just want to look at this risk. If I'm borrowing, then I'm going to have a higher debt ratio. My risk rating by rating agency is going to change. If the risk rating by rating agencies changes, it means the cost for me will go up. So I'm financing, for instance, in the case of Lebanon, we were looking at borrowing about close to $4 billion. This is the Basil plan. So this will add to our debt and changes our risk. It means also that when we borrow more and we have a higher risk, there will be a higher cost to the private sector when our interest rates go up. So in addition, we will be, if we borrow as we do in Lebanon, mostly from the commercial domestic market, we will be somewhat crowding out the private sector and raising the rates, the cost of borrowing for the private sector, which will imply a lower growth rate. So the process, what I'm trying to say, that the process of making decision has many implications, and we have to study it thoroughly with all its angles. What seems to be a good project, it may not actually, by taking into account all its implications and factors. Okay? Now, central bank financing is one of the worst. I don't want to go through the detail. You may just look at this PowerPoint presentation later on. Also, concessional financing is good if we can get it, like the World Bank, like regional funds, or bilateral from donors. Okay. Now, all this type of financing, when we said government financing, okay, it's a balance sheet financing. It means that it appears in the books of the government. So I have an option of balance sheet financing, and I have an option of off-balance sheet financing. The off-balance sheet financing, it means I look outside the government. The government is not the financing source. I'm looking at sources outside, and it doesn't generate debt burden for me. My debt will not change, and my risk may not change. The basic broad definition of off-balance sheet financing is private-public partnership. And private-public partnership takes several forms. A common form of it is what we call the BOT and variants of BOT, which is build, operate, and transfer. In any of these forms, the private sector is engaged, but eventually the government has immediately or through the process of production an equity. It means that the government eventually, today, the government did not create debt, but in the future, it has to create debt to buy it back or to buy it through the process itself. These could be complex operations, but feasible and better alternatives than the government doing the projects itself for many reasons, especially in terms of the execution of the product and the design of the plant and the contract and so on. It may not be the case all the time, but this is what has been reported and recorded, that it's another good option. And these are the list of BOT options that the government face. Each one of them has an advantages and disadvantages. So when we make the decision, we have to compare all of these options and decide on one that we consider the best option for us. So the process is a little bit delicate, and we cannot just rush and say, this is what we are going to do, as in some countries it has been the case. There are certain features special features of these build, operate, and transfer. For the time, I'm not going to go through the details of each one of them. And the risk, there's management risk, there's corruption and non-transparency in concession, there's financing risk, there is reform risk, and there is revenue risk. All of these risks are inherent in all of these options that we look at. Another off-balance sheet approach, which Dr. Mongi referred to, and it's very practical and feasible, and many countries are adopting it. It's the independent power production. Independent power production is one form of PPP, private-public partnership. But what does it entail, independent power production? It means that if the government wants a certain capacity, let's say 500 megawatts, they can do tendering, approach international producers, and have a deal on terms. They have to call for international bidding. It has to be open, transparent process. And all they have to do, the government, is in terms of their obligations, is to perhaps secure a location, their preferred location. The company could pay for it as well, and also sign a long-term purchase agreement. The company that will come and invest in power production would need to secure that the country is willing to buy from them over an extended period of time, which normally means the lifespan of the project itself. So for traditional power production, it's about 25 years. We know for nuclear, it's about 60 years. Very few arrangements under IPP would attract the private sector to be engaged in. So the IPP process, the government calls for bids. The bids will be based on only the cost of production using the machinery without the fuel, because the fuel varies. The fuel will be purchased either by the company that builds the plant or by the government, and if it's bought by the company just for feasibility of managing the flow of the power supply, it will be reimbursed by the government. Normally, IPPs offer you a cost that's variable. For first, they have a cost up to break-even point, then they may have actually a lower cost after that. These are, as I said, very popular in many countries. In Africa, they are expanding. In the Western countries, in the States, and in Europe, they are prevalent. Most of the production is being acquired by utilities through IPP. Okay? Now, when we do the IPP process, it has a certain approach to be done. We have to do the pre-qualifications. For instance, in the case of Lebanon or Jordan and other countries, we know that very much like in the oil sector, who are the major producers of power? We know it's Siemens with capacity of 500 to 1,000 megawatts. It's Siemens, it's General Electric, Alstom, and other companies of that magnitude. Very much as we do in the oil sector, we call for bids, for interest, and we select those who we think are qualified to be able to produce. The IPP contracts are very much like oil and gas contracts, because we know that in oil and gas, all the input and the investment at the initial stages up to production is undertaken by the company. The company takes a share depending on the formula. Like in Lebanon hybrid, there's royalties, there are production sharing, and there is taxation. Now, these are the IPP has many advantages, like let's suppose it is in the case for Lebanon. We know that the company is setting up the plant, selecting the staff, transferring technology, training the staff. So there is very little room, reduces the room and the space for untransparency and corruption. We have the last form of engagement that's possible. Also, it's an off-balance sheet financing. It is complete privatization for new capacity or for existing capacity. The government sells the whole process to the private sector, and the government becomes an oversight and regulator of the tariffs that companies charge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rashid. Our last, but certainly not least speaker is Mr. Peter Durant, who is going to talk about relevant techno-economic trends for solar PV in the Middle East and North Africa region. Mr. Durant has spent 16 years working in the global energy industry. He spent 10 years at Shell in the UK and other countries where he worked across the oil and gas downstream business in supply management, risk management, oil and CO2 trading, and in the renewable energy sector and future energy strategy. In 2010, Mr. Durant left Shell to focus full-time on clean tech, working with industry, governments on low-carbon technology, policy, and investments, and with the clean tech startups in renewables and electric vehicles. He joined Saudi Aramco 3 years ago to help develop and deliver Aramco's electricity strategy, particularly in regards to renewable energy. Mr. Durant has a BA in history from Arizona State and MA in international relations from the Brussels School of International Studies and a master's in finance and financial law from SOAS in London. Mr. Peter.
Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Rashid, I understand you went to University of Arizona. I hope we can be friends. Yes, as we're arch rivals. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invite. I actually spent part of my undergraduate at the AU in Paris, so I've always wanted to come to AUB. Had a lot of friends and colleagues who've studied here and have always been very impressed. So it's a real pleasure to be here. So today we're going to talk about a few different things. We're primarily going to focus on photovoltaics. We could talk about lots of different technology, but so much attention is given to PV in the region, I figured it's probably worth going through some of the dynamics around technology and economics. But we can also talk a bit in maybe the Q&A about things like CSP and wind trends, but we'll focus on PV for the purposes of this talk. So one of the things that people fundamentally don't understand very often about PV or photovoltaics is the modularity and the scale at which this technology can develop and technology can change. I like to give the example that PV is the world's smallest power plant, something that powers a wristwatch. Utility scale projects, this is here in one of our Aramco offices, a 10.5 megawatt carport project. Rooftop projects in commercial industrial buildings. Rooftops for homes. These systems tend to range anywhere from 1 to 10 kilowatts, depending on where you are in the world. dual use of infrastructure, that's in Belgium. Utility scale projects are really what I'll talk about primarily today. This is in the Mojave Desert in California. But also another thing worth noting is this is a proven technology. For many people, they think this is new. PV has been around now for about 40 or 50 years. This is a base station in Antarctica. This is the Solar 1 or Solar Impulse 1 or 2 that's now flying around the world. This is the International Space Station. Solar really cut its teeth and was originally invented for use in satellites. You can't combust in space without oxygen. So it was either that or nuclear technology, and most people didn't want a floating nuclear power plant in skies, rather hard to lift. That's the Mars rover. It's on satellites. It's everywhere humans have been and places humans have not been. So it's in Mars, it's on comets, satellites, the moon, you name it. Within the kingdom, within Saudi Arabia, we've actually had PV working for about 35 years. Many people, even within Aramco, are not aware of this, but we had some of our young field engineers go out and find the oldest solar panels we could find in oil and gas operations in the kingdom. We presented those to our CEO and senior vice president a few years ago when myself and a few expats arrived. And because someone had asked the question, well, it won't work in our climate. We hear this a lot. Won't work in our climate, too hot, too dusty, won't last. We pulled out modules made by Exxon in the 1970s that had been deployed for cathodic protection and gas well powering. I think they were installed in 1980, and one of our senior vice presidents remembered installing them as a graduate engineer, so that made him quite happy. Installation trends, one of the things that hasn't been covered today is just how much of this stuff is going in around the world, and how has this changed over time. So we'll talk about the drivers of price and the forecast of price, but what you're looking at here from Bloomberg is a breakdown of how much capacity of which technologies have been invested. Oh, wow, I don't know what's going on the screen. What could be doing that? That's odd.
Yeah, maybe you can push it to the left.
Shouldn't it just work in slide? Slideshow, yeah. That's very strange. There we go.
Yep.
That better. So what you're looking at is a breakdown of how much new capacity was installed, or net additions of capacity, by technology by year for the last 13 years. This data is actually from 2013. I'll give you a quick update on 2014 and 15. What you see is over time, the amount of renewable technology, the colored graphs, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The amount of red, which is nuclear, getting smaller, actually because of Fukushima and some closures in Europe. And one of the things that I have to point out to my colleagues very often, oil's not on here. Barely any generation of electricity around the world is done with oil, not gas, plenty of gas and coal, but not oil. So for a lot of people think, why would Aramco be interested in renewables? You compete with oil. Well, actually we don't. 5% of global oil goes into the power sector. Saudi Arabia consumes 26% of that 5%. So one of the reasons we're interested as Aramco is to stop burning the hydrocarbons domestically so they can be exported, which accounts for 75 or 80% of our GDP. But what you see over time, and especially in the last 5 years, we'll explain why this is, the amount and the share of this coming from PV and wind has been steadily increasing. And for those who are quick at maths, this is a 100% chart, so you can get an idea of the percent per year. So as of 2013, renewables, which included hydro, was now over 50% of newly installed capacity worldwide. With PV and wind, we're about 30% of that. Last year, in 2015, this is more like 50% of just wind and solar. So PV last year, 57 gigawatts, roughly, of new installed generation capacity was installed globally. Wind was actually 65 gigawatts. So between the two of them, new capacities of PV and wind accounted for about 50% of all new installs. And this trend is going to continue, I'll guarantee that. Of that share, PV has started to make up a bigger and bigger portion, and we'll talk about why that is. Though wind is still actually having more installed per year. And by all means, I'm happy to share these slides, so if I rush through and you don't get a picture, I'll share them with everyone, so that's fine. One of the reasons that is driving this is a chart from The Economist a few months ago, is that, or more than about a year ago, is this incredible drop in price over time. One thing you have to remember about a solar panel is it's a semiconductor. What did this cost in 1980? Thousands and thousands of dollars. Now, Apple would still like you to pay thousands of dollars, but the computing processing power of that is the same relationship. It's a semiconductor. So if I tell you that I think PV is going to be cheaper in 5 years, I'm effectively saying the cost per square meter of a television is going to be cheaper in 5 years. That's not exactly a bold statement. Or that computing processing power will get better. The semiconductor industry will be cheaper. Now, to put that in perspective, that's a 99% drop, roughly, in my lifetime. But interestingly, a lot of people look at this chart because it's not logarithmic and say, well, all the drops were back in the 70s and 80s. If I zoom in on that chart, that's actually about an 85% decrease since 2008, just in cell prices. If I look at levelized cost of energy, which was just discussed in the previous topic, this is from the investment bank Lazard. One of my jobs is covering market intelligence, so I spend inordinate amounts of my time with project developers and financiers, manufacturers, and others around the world, looking at exactly what costs are. And I also regularly benchmark how does one forecasting agency, reporting agency, compare to others. Generally speaking, I own no shares in Lazard, but I think they're quite good, and I benchmark them over time, and I'll show you that in the next slide. But what you've seen in wind, it might be, it's big enough. That's a really big screen. Wow. What you see in wind is that the levelized cost of utility scale wind has dropped by about 61% over the last 5 years. The cost of solar PV on a utility scale, 82% decline over the last 5 or 6 years. And I'll explain why we think that will continue over time, or at least on the capital side of it, interest rates being a separate issue. But what you've seen, and these are different LCOE versions from Lazard that they put out once a year, and these are their reported numbers. So this is one, if we want to do a cost comparison of LCOE, one of the things you always have to realize about any technology is there's not one LCOE. What does solar cost? Well, if I install the same solar system at the same price in England, where I call home, and I put that same system in Saudi Arabia, I'm not going to get the same levelized cost because the amount of sunshine is fundamentally different. If I install this in Germany, I'm going to get a different LCOE than Morocco, even if I have the same capital cost. Then, of course, there's also a range of capital costs to factor in. But if you look at what Lazard is showing, and this was published at the end of last year, is the unsubsidized LCOE in dollars per megawatt hour of renewable technologies. We can't really call them alternative anymore if they're the majority of stuff being installed, but alternative technology versus conventional. The conventional are based on US prices, so that's natural gas based on $3.50 a million BTU, which is relatively cheap in the global scale of things, and US coal prices. So what you see, and let's see how this compares to the region. So Lazard had said when this was published, the range they had for solar PV was somewhere between $50 and $70 a megawatt hour. Well, if we look at the PPAs that have recently been signed in the last 18 months, in DEWA, Dubai Electricity Water Authority, the Saudi company Aquapower was also tied by the other Saudi company, Abdul Latif Jameel and FRV, on a 20-year offtake agreement at 5.84 cents a kilowatt hour, right? Which is right smack in the range of what Lazard has. A lot of people looked at this and said, impossible, it can't be done. Even within the solar industry, people said that number's fake. Can't be real, they're buying the business. And we heard this over and over again. Except that there was another company that was bidding right behind them, and then a couple other companies bidding right behind them. Fast forward 3 months, Jordan announced their PPAs for solar. There were 4 50 megawatt bids, so each of these projects was 1/4 the size of Dubai, in a country with a higher, effectively, risk rate and discount rate for project finance. And you had tariffs of 6.1 to 6.77. Again, pretty competitive rates by almost any measure. If I look at wind, what Lazard would show is that wind costs somewhere between 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour and 7.7 cents a kilowatt hour. That's basically generally based on the North American market, which has a wide range of wind resource. If I look at wind PPAs in the region, in North Africa, or let's start with Egypt. So about a year ago, you had a reverse auction on an IPP PPA tender, where the winning bid was 4.1 cents a kilowatt hour. That was a consortium, I think, with GDF and some Japanese companies. Aquapower, the Saudi company, did bid on that. They came in last at 4.99 cents, and you had 2 or 3 other bidders in between. About, I guess, let's see, 4 weeks ago now, we're the 22nd of January, the announcements of Morocco's recent tender for 850 megawatts of wind were announced. The winning bid was 3.142 cents a kilowatt hour. That's from Siemens. That includes localization of tower manufacture, so the 100-meter high towers, and localization of blade manufacturing, the long 60-meter long blades, are all going to be built there. Now, we also have some other capital numbers not in PPAs for other deals done in the region. You have to understand that we also have non-disclosure agreements with many of these companies, so I'm only telling you what's in the public space, but there are other deals being done in the region at similar numbers. I just can't tell you exactly who would wear it, lest I violate a confidentiality agreement. What we've seen in the kingdom is that these sorts of prices are certainly indicative of what we would expect, largely because our wind resource is world-class. Many people don't realize that. We don't publicize it, but it is world-class, and obviously we have a lot of sun. Now, interestingly, as we go further north away from the kingdom into the Fertile Crescent, you have maybe not as much sunlight measured in pure radiance, but you have lower temperatures and less dust. So actually a balancing factor is PV, especially crystalline silicon, is a semiconductor. Semiconductors are affected badly by heat. They still work in the heat, but there is a temperature coefficient that as the temperature goes up, output goes down a little bit, right? So more sunshine is a factor that makes the power go up. More heat reduces that increase, but you'll still get more output in the summertime. But for areas further north of the kingdom, or even further north in the kingdom, we would see higher output from solar than we necessarily would in the Central Peninsula. So what's been driving this? And so I mentioned earlier the chart that was non-logarithmic. I'm not an engineer, I only have a BA in history, but you know, I have to make sure that I understand logarithmic charts. So this is a factor of 10 by a factor of 10. And what you're looking at, the reason I pull this chart up, it's actually 5 years old. And most people would say, as I just said, a 5-year-old estimation of cost is not a good thing to use in solar. The reason I bring this up is it's from Emmanuel Sachs at MIT. He took a different approach, and he applied what's called a learning curve, or a learning rate, experience curve. A learning curve simply means what is with every doubling of experience or doubling of capacity, what is the drop in price? Many of you have probably heard of Moore's law about semiconductors and computing processing power. I wish ours was as good as Moore's law, it's not. But that's that it will double in power and halve in price every 18 months. With solar, what we see is a learning curve rate of about 20 to 23%, let's say 18 to 23% over about a 40-year period. So that means with every doubling of capacity over time, the price drops by about 18 to 20-something%. Now this has held true since the late 1970s, and he looked at this in around 2010 based on 2009 data and said, let me extrapolate, which is always dangerous to do. But he said, let me extrapolate that this learning curve continues. And this was based on the US market. And he said, well, in 2009, we had about 11 gigawatts of solar installed globally. That was the base capacity installed worldwide, cumulative. And he said, if I continue this learning curve rate, by 2015, we'll have over 100 gigawatts. And by 2020, we'd have over 1,000 gigawatts, or roughly 1,000 gigawatts. And the price would drop from somewhere around 21 cents a kilowatt hour to around 7, 8, 9 cents a kilowatt hour in 2015, and as low as maybe 5 cents in 2020. And I remember when this came out because people said he was nuts. Said there's no way, this can't be true, you can't extrapolate forever. But again, back to technology. This isn't a commodity. This isn't even just a scale business, it's also a technology. And technology tends to get cheaper over time. So again, how do we compare to that? The previous prices I showed you, well, as of the end of 2014, we had about 180 gigawatts of installed capacity. So he was pretty close there. In fact, he was conservative. We've just installed another 57 gigawatts this year. The range of estimates for new deployments over the next 5 years per annum range from 70 to 150 a year. So I don't still think that we'll get to 1,000 gigawatts or a terawatt, a new nomenclature, a terawatt of installed capacity by 2020, but I'm quite sure we'll get there by 2025. If we look at prices, as we said in utility prices, we're probably already at his 2020 levels. Same kind of thing. Was that showing up? Oh, sorry, the image is being distorted for some reason. This was taken from the IEA, similar curve that they drew a while ago. What you'll see in this bit that I just circled was actually what I would call a sort of excess margin period. This is when Germany, back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, started their feed-in tariff program. And the uptake was so enormous that it actually distorted the market. There just wasn't enough capacity to manufacture the stuff around the world. So you had a blip in prices that went up a little for silicon, which drove prices up. And then they came right back down as new manufacturing capacity came online. So it was a disjoint of about 18 months to 2 years worth of manufacturing capacity. If I correct for that, and I look at what that learning curve gives me, it's a very similar learning curve to what Professor Sachs said 5 years or 6 years ago. That's where 2015 prices are today. So we're actually on that curve. All estimates are not equal. And this is what I was saying before about benchmarking data sources and time. PV represents a real challenge for people in the energy industry, even though it's very experienced, because we're not used to having to change our estimation of what stuff costs, other than the commodity itself, every 6 months. But you do with solar. Wind, not as much, but it's still there. But with solar PV, the prices changed, and they changed dramatically, and they changed quickly. So the IEA, and if there's anyone from the IEA here, I apologize for outing you on this. This is a chart that MIT produced recently for what they call the Future of Solar study. What you're seeing are year after year after year after year revisions of what they thought would be installed from solar. Also not the IEA, the EIA is the US Department of Energy. I would never invest my own money on predictions made by either of them, including as an ex-oil trader. So even on the oil markets, I wouldn't do it. But they will tell you that in the fine print in these reports, in the World Energy Outlooks, this is not a forecast, this is not accounting for changes in cost, et cetera, and they're totally right from an academic point of view. However, this is not how this analysis gets used. And I deal with that firsthand almost every day of my life at Aramco and in Saudi Arabia, that people treat this as truth, right? They say, well, this is the most definitive outlook for what will be installed. And I've even heard IEA representatives say that in conferences. This is our forecast of what will happen. The fine print will tell you it's not a forecast. So if I show them this, they say it's not a forecast. But if I didn't show them this, they say it's a forecast. The other thing is that if you also look at why they're so wrong, and they have to constantly change, you see the black dots are actual, is the price. This is what they thought the prices would be in 2030 at $4 a watt. Utility scale projects are currently going in at $1 a watt in 2015. That's not in 2009 dollars or whatever, that's nominal. So what we're actually seeing are prices dropping in nominal terms by multiple percents a year. This is from Bloomberg's New Energy Group, from their New Energy Outlook published the middle of last year. This is pre-COP21, pre some announcements by China to have monstrous installs of solar and wind over the next 5 years, and pre the extension of the investment and production tax credits in the US, which will account for significantly more volume. But based on their numbers from before, this is what they think is going to happen by 2040. And this was their moderate scenario. And we generally find Bloomberg to be relatively conservative. So that's one of the reasons that I chose them. But what you're looking at is a 36.5 times or 36.5-fold increase in installed capacity over from 2012 to 2040 in their estimates. 7.5 or 7.2 times for wind. Other renewables by 2. Nuclear is growing by about 1.6, which is good to see as another low carbon generation source. But even amongst analysts that I would generally say I like, still have to understand there's a huge amount of uncertainty going forward. So Bloomberg is the one I just showed you. That's the one on the right, and that's their chart out to 2040. They reckon 80 gigawatts of solar will be installed a year in 2020 and growing. GTM, or Green Tech Media, their outlook, which tends to track a bit closer to reality, is 135 gigawatts a year in 2020. So you can see that kind of huge range, even amongst analysts who specialize in this field, because people are just not sure how much the price will continue to come down. We all know it will keep coming down, but we just don't know how fast and rapid the uptake will be. So I'm sticking with a conservative number, but there's a lot of upside risk to this. And if I look at different projections of what people want to come up with, you can see how wide these ranges are. UBS published a report last year saying that would solar become the dominant source of energy in the world by 2050, and they were assuming a relatively small CAGR, or compounding annual growth rate. And they still get to a terawatt, that 1,000 gigawatts that I mentioned earlier, but by around 2030, even with a 2% growth rate. The IEA's high forecast gets there at about 2030, or gets to 2 terawatts by 2030. BNEF is on track with that as well. Agora Energiewende, and I've linked sources of this in the last slide, so you'll have them if you want them, is based on a high and low scenario. Agora is tracking quite closely as a PV specialist. And they're saying if we continue a 20% growth rate, we get to insane capacity, right? So they're obviously rather bullish, probably more bullish than I would be. So what's driving all this, and that's really the point of the talk, is a load of different things. I hear often this is just due to Chinese subsidy, or this was German subsidy before that, or it's a blip, or it's low interest rates, or it's what have you. It's lots of different things. All of those others are parts of it, but it's lots of other things. And inherently from a technological point of view and an academic point of view, we understand what's driving a lot of this. First and foremost is the efficiency of the module, the efficiency at which we convert sunlight to electricity. I'll show you a bit on that. But that also breeds less material and reduction in balance of system cost. The inverters themselves, the thing that turned direct current into alternating current, have gotten monstrously cheaper over the last 10 years, and we see lots of reason why that will continue. BOS stands for the balance of system, sometimes called the balance of plant. That's the entire system cost minus the module itself, minus the inverter. A lot of that is standardization, optimization, functional integration as well. We've seen these costs come down by a factor of 2 or 3. where everybody said it's a steel rack, it can't get any cheaper. Well, it's getting cheaper. We can explain why. Installation, a big part of this is also automation. As efficiency of the module gets higher, you actually start looking at the ability to do things like reduce your balance of plant, but also need to install less, right? I need less land, I need less space, less rooftop. And we're looking at full automation of installation over the next 10 years. You can imagine sort of a machine, and we already have seen prototypes and designs for these that are effectively rolling these off the back of a truck, much like a sidewalk laying machine does, if you've ever seen one of those. Higher specific yield, so that's optimization. Things like racking systems that track the sun used to be really, really expensive. Now they're actually quite cheap, and you only pay about 5 to 10 cents a watt premium for those, but you get a 15% increase in our latitude or a 25% increase in northern and farther southern latitudes. Financing and bankability. One thing we didn't talk about today is bankability. WACC, or the weighted average cost of capital. There's huge interest rate sensitivity on this, like there is with nuclear, because it's capital intensive. But the cost of our capital relative to conventional plant is getting quite a bit narrow. So if we were $4 a watt and a gas plant was $1 a watt, clearly interest rates affect us quite a bit. If we cost, say, 70 cents a watt and a gas plant costs 70 cents a watt, well, we have still an impact on interest rates, but much less of a delta than we used to. Also in bankability, it used to be that people wanted 15, 20% returns to finance a solar project because there wasn't that much experience. There are now over 200 gigawatts of solar installed around the world with many different environments, lots of different financing structures. Almost every major bank in the world is doing it, so they're very comfortable at this point with performance data. So the bankability of this has gotten better and better. And then, as we said, also automation and operation and maintenance. One of the things that one of my divisions works on is automated dry robotic cleaning of solar panels at utility scale. We'll show you that as well. And also remote sensing and remote control for systems. And scale is a huge part. To give you an idea of the changes in efficiency over the last couple of years, there are two main buckets of technology or competitive technology in the solar PV industry. Crystalline silicon makes up about 90% of the market, and thin film technology makes up about another 10. Disclosure, Aramco owns a 15% share in a thin film company by a sort of accident of history through a joint venture with Shell in Japan called Solar Frontier. That's a competitor of First Solar that I put up here. But the trend looks similar, but I specifically wanted to show you a competitor if you want to treat it as such. We don't see them as competitors, Saudi Aramco. The efficiency increases that we've seen have been quite profound. If I say we went from 11.6 to 15.6, back to maths, this isn't just a 4% increase. You know, that's an increase over 11%, so that's substantial. And that's 15.6 was 14.7 the previous quarter. The best modules they have now are upwards of 18%. So you can imagine that within about another year and a half or 2 years, we will go from 15.6 to 18.4% conversion efficiency. Again, the more the efficiency is, the less I need money for other things. Crystalline silicon has historically been more efficient but more expensive to produce, but it is also getting more efficient over time. So what does that actually mean when we talk about efficiency? Well, as the increased module efficiency, or as the module efficiency increases, I need less material to build the module itself. I need less land, less civil works, less racking, shorter or less cabling, and also less work. In high labor environments, that's important. So if we look at, say, inventing a brand new solar cell that is much more efficient, and let's say the cell itself costs 25% more, if nothing else changes, my entire system cost just went down 11%. So for cell manufacturers, they like the high efficiency because they're saying, I can sell a more premium product, but your total system cost declines on the back of it. Now, in reality, you're not actually seeing cell cost increasing, they're still decreasing as well. And as evidence of that, where the investment money is going into, the amount of relatively low efficiency capacity, manufacturing capacity that exists in the world has stayed steady. But if we look at all the expansion since 2011 into 2015, these have all been in high efficiency technologies. So in the mid-2000s and late 2000s to around 2010, China started to dominate this industry. So about 85% of manufacturing was in China. Yep. Was dominating this industry. But since then, what you're starting to see is manufacturing moving to other countries, some to do with trade barriers, but a lot to do with high efficiency modules. The changes in efficiency over time are certainly not leveling out. They did in the 2000s during that bubble, but now what you're seeing is a rapid increase in efficiencies. I'll skip through some of this. Inverters, we mentioned learning curves for solar modules, similar learning curves for inverters. These have dropped by the weight and the material used for a kilowatt has dropped by a factor of 10 in the last 20 years. We'll skip through this. My last slide, I'll just say expect disruption. So all the forecasts that we've shown assume no breakthroughs in technology, no radical thing that we can't already see being done in a lab and marginally improved to be able to make commercial and make bankable. But there are disruptive things on the horizon that could, one might even say likely happen, but not making that as a prediction. What we call third generation PV, things like perovskites that are in labs, which are potentially total game changers for the cost of solar. What would drop it an awful lot. What's called roll-to-roll coating. We're imagined as sort of a paper machine with just spraying paint that prints solar cells. Default building material. People are already actually working on photovoltaic paint. They're working on just material that can be strapped on into the facades of buildings as cladding with no needs to plug and play or to actually wire things up. Cheap storage, a bit of a haram topic if I talk about electric cars, which part of my background is in, but electric storage technology is getting cheaper, and it's on a similar learning curve to PV. If that really does become cheap, you're looking at an addressable market 4 or 5 times bigger. Full automation of installation, as I said, full automation of cleaning, I think we're going to have in the next 2 or 3 years, and then commercial efficiency beyond 30%, where you end up with a fundamentally different cost structure. So what we're looking at over the next decades, this will be the cheapest source of electricity, certainly in the world. I'll leave it at that. The sources that are here, if you want them, I'll send this around with the hyperlinks to some of that research material that's there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Durant. We are running really, really late, so unfortunately we will take just a few questions, and I kindly ask that questions and answers to be brief, please. Please, yeah.
Debt to GDP is an important number. Why is it 50%? You will eliminate most of the countries at 50% debt to GDP.
That number, basically 50%, is the number that I'm talking about from the credit rating agency point of view. Because from the credit agency's point of view, they look at it from the prospect of if it's more than 50%, it becomes quite an issue of, yes, I had another slide after that, but because of the time I didn't, because you can see very easily the countries that I had listed over there from the ratings of the countries. So if it is more than 50%, you can very easily see what type of a rating do they have, whether they have an investment grade rating or whether the rating is below the investment grade rating. So that's a threshold type of a thing. If it's more than 50%, it gets a bit of a concern. Obviously, those who have 100%, that's obviously quite a big concern, but it gets to the negative outlook then. If it's more than 50%, the rating agency give it a bit of a negative outlook. So
You stressed delay in construction. What's the reason for that? Technical? I mean, why there always delay in construction of plant?
yeah, I mean, the ones that I listed over there are generally, this has been happening, and the ones that I had in the news media, which were in Korea and France, most of them are first of a kind. As you can see, that rates and that have been discussed in terms of solar. I mean, learning rates are there. Same is the case for first of a kind. If you're building first of a kind, add 30%. There was a very interesting study done by the Chicago University, which said that, okay, if you're building first of a kind, you should add about 30% or up to 30% to that particular technology. I'm not only talking about nuclear, but that particular technology was there, that study was on nuclear. So yes, but if you're talking any technology, I mean, from the point of view, if you're specifically like solar, how much has the costs been reduced because of solar being built? I mean, initially it used to be unthinkable about, the cost used to be a levelized cost basis. You couldn't even discuss it. But now, yes, that's the factor. Same is the case for nuclear. The ones that are known technology and some of the ones that the Russians are building, VVER that have been, and the ones in China, that's why I said the costs are 22,000, I think 22,000 per kilowatt.